It began with a lie whispered by the winter. A lie that told exhausted soldiers the worst was behind them, that the Ardennes was quiet, gentle, safe, a place where men could catch their breath after months of brutal fighting. Snow covered the forest in soft white layers. Icicles hung from pine branches that swayed in the stillness. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys of abandoned cottages. And for a moment, the front felt like a place the war had forgotten. But the Ardennes was not peaceful. It was holding its breath. Beneath that frozen calm, an entire army was hiding. Tens of thousands of German soldiers waited in the woods, motionless, shivering in pale winter light. Tanks were parked under nets disguised as fallen branches. Artillery crews crouched beside silent guns, their breath clouding the air. Officers studied maps by candlelight, their faces gaunt and determined. Somewhere in that vast forest, a clock was ticking, not loudly, but with a slow, patient beat that echoed through the cold. The Americans knew none of this. They saw only snow, trees, and the illusion of rest. Patrols walked along quiet paths. Jeeps rolled through powdery roads with headlights dimmed. Letters from home were read by lanterns inside drafty cabins. Soldiers dug shallow foxholes into frozen earth. The kind men dig only when they believe they won't need to fight. Some joked about being sent to the quiet sector. Others counted the days until they hoped the war would end. But winter clouds are good at hiding storms. As the nights grew darker and the cold deepened, German forces tightened their grip around the silent forest. They had one final gamble, a desperate attempt to turn the tide, fracture the Allied armies, and claw back a war already slipping from their fingers. And they depended on the oldest Ally winter ever had: surprise. Then, on a December dawn, when the world was barely awake, the lie shattered. Artillery ripped through the forest with a violence that seemed to tear the sky apart. Shells burst in the treetops, raining splinters of wood and steel. Snow exploded into clouds of white smoke. Entire American outposts vanished under the barrage. Radios crackled with panic. Footsteps ran across frozen ground. And through the fog, through the cold, through the ringing silence that followed each explosion, German infantry surged forward like shadows thrown by fire. The Battle of the Bulge had begun not as a battle of glory, but as a battle of shock, confusion, and survival. American lines bent under the weight of the offensive. Villages, once calm, filled with gunfire. Columns of refugees fled down icy roads. Tanks roared through the woods, engines sputtering in the cold. Soldiers fought with frozen fingers, exhaustion weighing their every step. Snow turned red. Trees burst into flames. Each hour felt longer than the last. But the Americans did not break. They held crossroads with nothing but grit. They defended ridgelines against impossible odds. They turned shattered towns into fortresses built of rubble and willpower. And each day, as the storm raged, their resolve grew stronger. Tonight, we return to that winter, to the breathless quiet before the storm, to the first shells tearing open the sky, to the men who found themselves swallowed by a cold that sought to break them and a battle that tested every limit they had. Before we begin, tell me in words where in the world you are tuning in from tonight and what the winter feels like where you are. Is it warm where you rest, or can you almost feel that Ardennes frost settling around you as this story unfolds? And here is a second invitation. Share in words why you choose to listen to these deep journeys into history. Is it the calm, the storytelling, the weight of the past? I listen to every answer. A third request, unique to this story. If you know someone who ever served in any era, share their name so that in this quiet night, history holds them close beside us. And if these slow, heavy descents into the past help you unwind, help you breathe, help you drift into sleep, consider subscribing. December 10th, 1944. The truck convoy rolls to a stop in the Belgian village of Vith, engines coughing diesel smoke into the frozen air. Young American soldiers climb down from canvas-covered beds, boots hitting cobblestones with hollow thuds that echo through empty streets. These men are fresh, so fresh their uniforms still hold creases from the quartermaster's warehouse. The soldiers of the 106th Infantry Division have arrived at what their officers call the Ghost Front, a place where nothing ever happens. They don't know they have 6 days to live. They don't know that in less than a week, this quiet sector will explode into the largest and bloodiest battle the United States Army will fight in the entire Second World War. Right now, as they joke about hot coffee and dry socks, 8,000 of them are already dead. They just don't know it yet. The Ardennes sector stretches 85 miles along the German-Belgian border, a dense forest of pine and oak that turns into a maze when winter fog settles between the trees. It's beautiful in a hostile way, rolling hills, deep valleys, narrow roads that twist through villages with unpronounceable names. In December 1944, this entire sector is held by just 4 American divisions. Do the math. And the numbers reveal something terrifying. 1 division for every 20 miles of front. The standard military doctrine calls for 1 division every 5 to 8 miles. Here, the line is stretched so thin you could drive a tank through the gaps and never see an American soldier. And that's exactly what's about to happen. But the High Command doesn't see it coming. They've convinced themselves the Ardennes is safe because it's rough terrain, because it's winter, because the Germans are finished. They're wrong on every count. The soldiers settling into their positions don't look like combat veterans because they aren't. The 106th Infantry Division arrived in theatre 5 days ago. 5 days, and most of these men have never heard a shot fired in anger. Their average age is 22. Some are teenagers who lied about their birth date to join up after Pearl Harbor, boys who wanted to be heroes before the war ended without them. Now they're here, spread across frozen foxholes and crumbling Belgian farmhouses, told to hold the line in a sector everyone agrees doesn't matter. The veterans who briefly them call it a rest area, a place where exhausted units recover after brutal fighting in places like Hürtgen Forest. The new guys think they got lucky. They think they'll learn the ropes here, maybe fire a few harassing shots, then rotate to a real combat zone. The word that keeps coming up in letters home is quiet. They have no idea that across the forest, in the darkness, beyond their listening posts, 200,000 German soldiers are moving into attack positions. December 14th, captain's briefing in the town of Clairvaux, Luxembourg. The intelligence officer spreads maps across a wooden table in a requisitioned house that still smells like the family who fled 2 months ago. He points to red marks indicating suspected German positions, and his finger traces what aerial reconnaissance has reported. Tank movements, vehicle concentrations, increased radio traffic. The officers gathered around the table, nod politely, but nobody looks worried. The intelligence officer himself doesn't sound convinced. Probably routine repositioning, he says. Maybe moving units south to counter Patton's advance. Everyone agrees this makes sense. The Germans are retreating everywhere else, falling back toward the Rhine, getting pounded by Allied bombers every time the weather clears. Why would they attack here, in winter, through terrain that favours defence? The briefing ends with the standard warning to maintain alertness, but you can see it in their faces. These men don't believe anything significant will happen. They're planning Christmas dinners, writing home about being in Paris by New Year's. The intelligence reports get filed away, nobody increases the alert level, nobody calls for reinforcements, but at the listening posts, the men who actually stare into the darkness are hearing things that don't fit the official narrative. December 15th, 11 o'clock at night. A forward observer named Edwards crouches in a foxhole so cold his breath crystallizes instantly in the air. He's supposed to be watching for German patrols, but instead he's listening. Metal clanking. Not the random noise of a few vehicles, something bigger, more organised. He reports it up the chain. An hour later, he reports it again. Engines. Lots of engines. His sergeant tells him he's hearing things, that the forest plays tricks at night. But Edwards knows what he's hearing. He grew up next to a railway yard in Pittsburgh. He knows the sound of heavy machinery. Across the 85-mile front, dozens of listening posts are reporting similar things. Strange sounds, shadows moving between trees, the smell of diesel fuel on the wind. Every report gets the same response. Probably nothing. Stay alert. Report anything unusual. The definition of unusual apparently doesn't include the largest German offensive build-up since 1940. At Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, more than 100 miles away, General Dwight Eisenhower is planning the next phase of the Allied advance into Germany. The maps on his walls show arrows pointing east, always east, toward Berlin. His intelligence staff has assured him that Germany is finished as an offensive force. The Luftwaffe is grounded by lack of fuel. The Wehrmacht is retreating on every front. Ultra intercepts the decoded German radio traffic that gives the Allies an almost magical ability to read enemy plans, show increased activity in the Ardennes sector, but analysts attribute this to defensive preparations. Nobody considers that the Germans might have learned to hide their intentions, that maybe not everything goes through radio communications that Ultra can intercept. The entire Allied command structure has convinced itself of a comfortable narrative. The war in Europe will be over by spring, possibly sooner. They're arguing about who gets credit for victory, not preparing for German counteroffensives. It's the most catastrophic intelligence failure of the Western European campaign, and it's about to cost thousands of lives. The weather is Germany's secret weapon, and they know it. For weeks, meteorologists in the Wehrmacht have been studying weather patterns, looking for the perfect storm, or rather, the perfect absence of storms. They need low clouds, fog, conditions that will ground the Allied air forces. Without air superiority, the Germans understand they're fighting a losing battle. But take away those thousands of American and British fighters, those medium bombers that appear within minutes of any German movement, and suddenly the odds change. The forecast for mid-December shows exactly what they need: a high-pressure system moving across Europe, bringing cold temperatures and persistent fog. The clouds will sit at 500 feet, maybe lower. No planes will fly. No reconnaissance will spot the German build-up. It's a meteorological gift, and Hitler's planners have timed the offensive to exploit it. The Americans at their listening posts can hear the German preparations, but can't see them. The pilots who could spot the concentrations are grounded. The Germans are attacking blind, but so are the defenders. December 15th, evening. The poker game in the farmhouse near Losheim Gap has been going on for 2 hours. 5 soldiers from different units, brought together by the random mathematics of military deployment, sitting around a table made from an old door balanced on ammunition crates. They're playing for cigarettes and francs that none of them can spend in this empty sector. The conversation drifts the way soldiers' conversations always do. Food, they miss girls. They left behind. What they'll do when they get home. One kid from Ohio talks about his father's garage, how he's going to take over the business, maybe expand it. A sergeant from Brooklyn makes jokes about the ghost front, says if the Germans wanted to attack, they'd have done it by now. Outside, the temperature has dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The fog is so thick you can't see 20 feet. Somewhere in that fog, less than 2 miles away, German combat engineers are cutting lanes through barbed wire and marking paths through American minefields. The poker players don't hear them. They're laughing about something, arguing about whether a flush beats a straight. In 6 hours, 3 of them will be dead. The failure isn't just intelligence reports ignored or sounds in the darkness dismissed. It's something deeper, more systemic. The Allied command has fallen victim to its own success. They've been winning for so long since D-Day, since the breakout from Normandy, since the liberation of Paris, that they've forgotten how to think defensively. Every planning meeting focuses on offense. How fast can we advance? When will we cross the Rhine? Who gets to take Berlin? The possibility that Germany might still be capable of a major counter-offensive simply doesn't fit the narrative. When evidence appears that contradicts this comfortable story, it gets explained away. Tank concentrations? They're moving south. Radio traffic? Routine communications? Reports from frontline units? Green troops getting nervous. The cognitive bias is so strong that even direct evidence gets filtered through a lens of dismissal. Military historians will later call it victory disease, the assumption that because you've been winning, you'll keep winning. The Ardennes sector is about to become a textbook example of what happens when a military organisation stops questioning its own assumptions. As midnight approaches on December 15th, the last peaceful night in the Ardennes, the contrast between American and German preparations is absolute. On the American side, soldiers sleep in their foxholes, officers write letters by candlelight, headquarters staff plans operations that will never happen. The 106th Division has its units spread across miles of front, with gaps between positions large enough to drive entire tank columns through. They have no reserves to speak of. If something breaks through, there's nothing behind them except empty forest and undefended supply depots. Across the line, in the darkness beyond the American positions, 200,000 German soldiers are moving into final attack positions. 7 panzer divisions, 13 infantry divisions, 2,000 artillery pieces being wheeled into position, their crews checking angles and coordinates by red-filtered flashlight. The German soldiers know something the Americans don't. At 5:30 tomorrow morning, everything changes. At 5:30, the largest German artillery barrage since the invasion of Russia will erupt across 85 miles of front. At 5:30, the quiet sector dies. And with it, the comfortable American assumption that this war is nearly over. 5:30 a.m., December 16th, 1944, the world ends in fire and thunder. 2,000 German artillery pieces fire simultaneously across 85 miles of the Ardennes front, and the sound is something beyond human experience. It's not loud in any normal sense, it's a physical force that slams into your chest, that makes your organs vibrate, that turns thought into nothing but pure animal terror. The shells come in waves, high explosives and air bursts, pounding American positions that moments before were quiet. Foxholes in a quiet forest. Soldiers jerk awake, not understanding what's happening, their minds unable to process the transition from sleep to apocalypse. Trees explode into splinters, frozen earth fountains into the air. Communication trenches collapse, burying men alive in soil that's half dirt, half ice. The barrage is so intense that seismographs in Switzerland, 250 miles away, register the vibrations. The Germans are not probing for weaknesses. They are attempting to destroy the American line through sheer explosive force. In the first 90 minutes, more shells fall on the Ardennes than fell on Britain during the entire Blitz. The sensory overload is complete and deliberate. German artillery doctrine has spent 5 years perfecting this technique, the overwhelming first strike designed not just to kill, but to paralyze, to turn organized units into scattered individuals who can't think beyond the next explosion. In his foxhole near Losheim Gap, Private First Class, Rodriguez experiences what thousands of American soldiers are experiencing simultaneously. The first shells wake him from dreams of home. The second wave sends him diving deeper into frozen mud. By the third wave, he's lost all sense of direction. The darkness is broken by orange flashes that illuminate nothing but more explosions. The sound has become continuous, no gaps between detonations, just one endless roar punctuated by closer blasts that feel like being punched in the stomach. His ears are bleeding. He doesn't know that yet. He's trying to remember the training, trying to think, but thinking requires a sequence of thoughts, and there's no sequence anymore. Just now, just surviving this second and then the next second. Later, trying to describe it to an army psychiatrist, he'll say, "The earth was screaming. It's the best description anyone will give." At 6 o'clock, the artillery fire shifts deeper behind the American lines, and the German infantry emerges from the fog. The morning is so cold that breath freezes instantly, and the fog is thick enough to hide an approaching man at 30 feet. The German soldiers are wearing white winter camouflage smocks over their field grey uniforms, turning them into ghosts that materialize from nothing. American soldiers, dazed and deafened from the barrage, see movement and don't understand what they're seeing. The shapes don't look like soldiers, they look like something else, something almost supernatural. Then the shapes start shooting, and the unreality shatters. The Germans are advancing in waves, thousands of them, more soldiers than most American troops have seen in months. The scale is wrong, everything about this is wrong. Germany is supposed to be finished. Germany is supposed to be defending, but here they are, attacking in numbers that shouldn't be possible, advancing with the confidence of troops who know they have overwhelming force on their side. 7:30 a.m. Lieutenant Morrison tries to call regiment headquarters and discovers the field telephone is dead. Not damaged, cut. All across the front, communication lines that survived the artillery barrage have been cut by German infiltrators who moved through American positions in darkness. Morrison tries the radio and gets nothing but static. He sends a runner to the next company position, a quarter-mile south. The runner never arrives. Morrison is the commander of a rifle company that 12 hours ago numbered 140 men. Now he can account for maybe 60, and half of those are wounded or too shell-shocked to function. He has no communications, no orders, no idea what's happening beyond his immediate position. This isolation is being replicated at every level of command. Battalion can't reach regiment, regiment can't reach division. Division headquarters is trying to make sense of fragmentary reports that suggest the impossible attacks everywhere, all at once, in strength. The American command structure is dissolving into chaos, and the German attack is less than 2 hours old. The Losheim Gap, a natural corridor through the Ardennes hills, collapses first. The 14th Cavalry Group, essentially a reconnaissance unit in the wrong place doing the wrong job, finds itself facing the full weight of the 1st SS Panzer Division. These aren't regular Wehrmacht troops. They're Waffen-SS, Hitler's ideological soldiers, units with names like Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, veterans of the Eastern Front where retreat meant death. They hit the American cavalry positions like a sledgehammer hitting crystal. By 8:15 a.m., the 14th Cavalry Group has ceased to exist as a coherent unit. Some troops retreat in good order. Some surrender. Some die in their foxholes. Some scatter into the forests and will wander for days before finding friendly lines. The gap 5 miles wide, at its narrowest point, is now completely open. German armour begins pouring through, tank columns advancing west, with nothing between them and the vital road junctions at Street Vith and Bastogne except empty Belgian countryside. The breakthrough is complete. The question now is how deep the Germans can penetrate before American reserves can respond. At 9 o'clock a.m., a radio operator at Bastogne picks up a transmission that will be repeated in various forms, hundreds of times, across the next few hours. It's a desperate voice, young and panicked, breaking radio discipline because discipline no longer matters. They're everywhere. Jesus Christ, they're everywhere. We got tanks behind us. We're surrounded. Can anybody hear me? We're static. The transmission cuts off. The radio operator stares at his equipment, then looks at the sergeant. Nobody knows what to do with this information. Bastogne is 20 miles behind the front lines. If German tanks are behind American units, if positions are surrounded, then the entire defensive structure has collapsed far faster than anyone thought possible. The reports keep coming, each one more alarming than the last. North of Street Vith, multiple German divisions advancing, centre sector, units overrun. South, near Clairvaux, armour breakthrough. The map at headquarters accumulates red marks, enemy positions, confirmed sightings, reported attacks. By noon, the map is more red than blue. Someone needs to tell Eisenhower. Someone needs to wake up the command structure. The quiet sector is burning. The German plan is revealing itself through action. 3 simultaneous thrusts, each with a specific objective. In the north, Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army is driving for the Meuse River bridges between Liège and Huy. The centre thrust under Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army is targeting Brussels. The southern attack under Brandenberger's 7th Army is providing flank protection. If successful, the offensive will split the British 21st Army Group from the American forces, encircle dozens of Allied divisions, and potentially force a negotiated peace in the west. This isn't a limited attack or a spoiling offensive. This is Germany's last card, played with everything they have left. The Americans receiving this attack don't know the strategic objectives. They just know they're being overwhelmed by an enemy that shouldn't exist in these numbers. The psychological impact is devastating. For months, American soldiers have been told they're winning, that Germany is collapsing, that the war is almost over. Now that comfortable narrative is shattering in real time, replaced by the terrifying reality of being on the receiving end of a German blitzkrieg. The first American casualties are catastrophic. The 99th Infantry Division, holding positions near the northern shoulder of the offensive, loses 18 officers and more than 400 men in the first 2 hours. Entire platoons simply cease to exist, erased by artillery fire or overrun by German infantry. Aid stations are overwhelmed within minutes. Medics treating wounded soldiers find themselves under direct attack as German troops surge past American positions. The rules of engagement, which sides respect medical facilities, which sides allow withdrawal of wounded, are breaking down under the pressure of the assault. Some German units, particularly the Waffen-SS formations, are not taking prisoners. They're shooting wounded Americans in their foxholes, executing soldiers trying to surrender. Word of these atrocities spreads through the American lines faster than official communications, carried by survivors and refugees, transforming the character of the battle from professional warfare into something more desperate and personal. But not every American unit collapses. At road junctions and village crossroads throughout the Ardennes, small groups of soldiers make the instinctive decision to fight rather than flee. A platoon of engineers at a bridge, a company of infantry in a stone church, a few tank destroyers at an intersection. These isolated resistance points don't stop the German advance, but they slow it. And in a battle where the German timetable requires advancing 20 miles per day, every hour of delay matters. Neerhofen, a regiment of the 99th Division, stops the advance of the entire 12th SS Panzer Division for a full day. The Germans expect to punch through and be gone within hours. Instead, they find themselves in a brutal, close-quarters fight for frozen streets, losing tanks to hidden anti-tank guns, losing infantry to American machine gun positions that won't retreat. These small victories are invisible to the bigger picture, but they're happening across the entire front. Hundreds of nameless actions that don't appear in the dramatic narratives, but that are collectively destroying the German timetable before the offensive is a day old. As darkness falls on December 16th, 1944, the scale of the disaster becomes clear at Allied headquarters. Eisenhower's staff is receiving reports that seem impossible. Entire divisions in contact across 85 miles. Multiple penetrations, some more than 10 miles deep. 2 divisions possibly more in danger of encirclement, communications broken across most of the front, the casualty estimates are rough but horrifying, thousands dead, thousands missing, thousands captured. This isn't a local attack or a spoiling operation. This is what one staff officer, with considerable understatement, calls a serious German counteroffensive. The comfortable assumption that Germany was finished, that the war in Europe was effectively won, has just been revealed as catastrophic wishful thinking. In his headquarters, Eisenhower makes the first critical decision of the battle. Instead of trying to restore the old front line, he'll build a new defensive line behind the breakthrough, rush reinforcements to key road junctions, and let the Germans advance into a killing box. It's the right decision, but it requires time. Time for units to move. Time for new defensive lines to solidify. Time that will be bought with the blood of soldiers still holding out in that hell of forest and fog. The Battle of the Bulge has begun, and nobody German or American truly understands yet just how terrible it's going to become. September 16th, 1944. The conference room at Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia is silent in the way rooms become silent when everyone knows something terrible is about to be said. The men gathered around the wooden table are Germany's most senior military commanders. Generals whose uniforms display decades of campaign ribbons and whose faces show the exhaustion of fighting a losing war on 3 fronts. They've been summoned without explanation, told only that the Führer has a strategic announcement of vital importance. When Hitler enters, they stand. When he spreads the maps across the table and begins speaking, they cannot believe what they're hearing. Hitler is proposing an offensive through the Ardennes forest, a drive of 125 miles to capture the port city of Antwerp, splitting the Allied forces and potentially changing the entire direction of the war in the West. The generals exchange glances. Some think their leader has lost his mind. Others think this is some kind of test. None of them, in this moment, believe they're listening to a plan that will actually be executed. They're wrong. The man presenting this audacious plan is not the Hitler of 1940, the military genius who stunned the world with the conquest of France. This is Hitler after years of defeats, after Stalingrad, after the Normandy invasion, a man who spends hours studying maps of battles that no longer exist and armies that have been destroyed. But his strategic thinking, however delusional about Germany's actual capabilities, remains frighteningly clear. He understands something the Allied commanders have forgotten in their rush toward Berlin. The Anglo-American alliance is a marriage of convenience, not a natural partnership. The British and Americans disagree about strategy, about command, about objectives. Churchill wants to push through the Alps into Austria. Eisenhower wants a broad front advance into Germany. Montgomery thinks he should lead the main thrust. Patton thinks Montgomery is a cautious fool. Hitler believes that a sharp, devastating blow, a battlefield catastrophe that traps tens of thousands of Allied soldiers, might crack this fragile coalition. If he can reach Antwerp and cut off the supply lines for an entire army group, the Allies might accept a negotiated peace in the West, allowing Germany to concentrate all forces against the Soviet Union. It's a fantasy built on a foundation of genuine strategic insight, and that combination makes it especially dangerous. The plan Hitler unveils has a codename that's deliberately misleading: Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. It's supposed to sound defensive, like Germany is preparing to defend the Rhine River against Allied attack. In reality, it's the most ambitious German offensive operation since the invasion of Russia. 3 armies, totaling 28 divisions, will attack through the Ardennes on a front of 85 miles. The northern thrust, 6th Panzer Army under Sepp Dietrich, will be the main effort, driving for the Meuse River bridges, and then northwest to Antwerp. The centre thrust, 5th Panzer Army under Hasso von Manteuffel, will protect Dietrich's flank and cut off Allied units south of the penetration. The southern thrust, 7th Army under Erich Brandenberger, will establish a defensive shoulder against American counterattacks from the south. If successful, and Hitler emphasises this word if, the operation will trap the British 21st Army Group, the Canadian 1st Army, and the US. More than 1 million Allied soldiers cut off from supplies and reinforcements. He gives his commanders 7 days to reach Antwerp, 7 days to change the war. The generals sitting around the table listening to this presentation are not idiots, and they're not yes men, despite what post-war memoirs will sometimes claim. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, the overall commander in the West, immediately recognises the operational problems. The Ardennes terrain that makes it a weak point in the Allied line also makes it horrible ground for the kind of rapid armour advance this plan requires. The roads are narrow, the forests dense, the hills steep. A single destroyed bridge can halt an entire division. More critically, the distance to Antwerp is 125 miles, through territory the Allies have occupied for months, with established supply lines and excellent internal communications. Reaching Antwerp in 7 days means advancing nearly 20 miles per day, every day, without pause, through active combat. General Feldmarschall Walter Model, commander of Army Group B, proposes an alternative, a limited offensive to encircle and destroy several American divisions east of the Meuse, shortening the German front line and buying time. This small solution, as it becomes known, is tactically achievable. Hitler's large solution, Antwerp or nothing, requires near-perfect execution and assumes American resistance will collapse. The debate goes on for hours, Hitler remains unmoved, Antwerp or nothing. The fuel calculations reveal just how desperate the gamble really is. Germany's Quartermaster Corps presents the numbers, and they're devastating. The operation, as planned, requires 9 million gallons of fuel, gasoline for vehicles, diesel for trucks, high-octane aviation fuel for fighter cover. Germany has 4.5 million gallons available. The deficit is obvious, impossible to ignore. Hitler's solution to this mathematical impossibility is simple and insane. Capture American fuel depots. The plan literally requires that German armoured columns overrun Allied supply dumps, seize their fuel, and use it to continue advancing. It's like planning to rob a bank by assuming you'll find the keys to the vault lying on the front desk. The generals know this is madness. But they also know that disagreeing too forcefully with Hitler in 1944 can be career-ending or life-ending. Some argue quietly, some stay silent. None of them can stop the offensive from being ordered. By October, ready or not, the plan is approved. Preparations begin. The largest German offensive since 1941 is now in motion, propelled by a combination of desperation, delusion, and one undeniable fact: Germany is losing, and doing nothing means certain defeat. The deception operation is where German competence shows through the strategic fantasies. The Wehrmacht understands that surprise is the only way this offensive has any chance of success, and they orchestrate a masterpiece of military misdirection. False. Radio traffic suggests a major counter-offensive building in the Saar region, 200 miles south of the actual attack zone. Dummy tank divisions, literally wooden tanks on truck chassis, appear in aerial reconnaissance photos near Cologne. Troop movements toward the Ardennes happen only at night, with strict radio silence and extreme camouflage discipline. Units move in small groups. Artillery pieces are wheeled into position under cover of darkness and camouflaged before dawn. Even senior German officers are kept in the dark about the offensive's true scope. The deception works brilliantly. Allied intelligence sees the German build-up but interprets it as defensive positioning, expecting Germany to shorten their lines and dig in for the winter. Ultra intercepts the decoded German radio transmissions that have given the Allies an enormous intelligence advantage, capture increased activity but nothing specific. The Germans have learned to keep critical information off the radio. By December 15th, 28 German divisions, totaling more than 200,000 troops, are positioned in the forests along the Ardennes front. Allied intelligence estimates place German forces in the region at 3 to 4 divisions. The intelligence failure is comprehensive and fatal. The historical parallel Hitler keeps referencing is 1940, and he's not wrong to make the comparison. In May 1940, Germany launched an offensive through the Ardennes that military experts considered impossible tank terrain. The attack shattered French and British defences, reached the English Channel in 10 days, and forced France to surrender within 6 weeks. It was one of the most stunning military victories in modern history. Now, 4 years later, Hitler is attempting to repeat that triumph. But the situation has changed in ways his plan doesn't acknowledge. In 1940, the Wehrmacht was a fresh, fully equipped force attacking enemies who weren't prepared for mobile warfare. In 1944, the Wehrmacht is a battered, undersupplied force attacking enemies who have perfected mobile warfare and who possess overwhelming material superiority. In 1940, Germany had air superiority. In 1944, the Luftwaffe can barely contest Allied control of the skies. In 1940, German logistics could support rapid advances. In 1944, German logistics run on captured equipment and horses because there's not enough fuel for trucks. Hitler is trying to recreate a victory from a different war with a different army under different conditions. The only thing that remains the same is his willingness to gamble everything on one desperate throw of the dice. December 12th, 1944. The final commanders' meeting before the offensive takes place in a bunker complex near the German border. Security is so tight that attending officers have their briefcases searched and are forbidden from taking notes. Hitler speaks for more than 2 hours, and his speech is a mixture of genuine strategic analysis and complete fantasy. He's correct that the Allied coalition has tensions that a major shock might crack. He's correct that capturing Antwerp would create a logistical crisis for the British and Canadian armies. He's correct that the Americans have stretched their line thin in the Ardennes. But he's delusional about Germany's ability to execute the plan, about Allied response times, about fuel availability, about air power, about the basic arithmetic of combat strength. The generals listening know all this. Some have privately called the plan a suicide mission, but they also see one thing clearly. Germany is dying slowly, being crushed between Soviet armies in the east and Anglo-American forces in the west. At least this plan offers action instead of passive defeat. At least it tries something. Model later tells his staff, this plan does not have a 10% chance of, but it has a 10% chance, which is 10% more than sitting here waiting for the end. On that bleak calculation, the Wehrmacht prepares to attack. The contrast with Allied planning in the same period is absolute. In November 1944, Churchill and Eisenhower meet to discuss the final campaigns of the war. The conversation is entirely about offence, when to cross the Rhine, which armies get priority for supplies, whether to make a single thrust toward Berlin or a broad front advance. The possibility that Germany might launch a major counteroffensive is not seriously considered. American intelligence summaries from late November describe the German military as incapable of offensive operations of any significant scale. British assessments conclude that German fuel shortages make mobile operations impossible. The entire Allied command structure has convinced itself that Germany is finished. They're planning the victory parade while the enemy is planning an attack. The intelligence exists to warn them. Ultra intercepts show increased German activity, aerial reconnaissance spots troop movements, frontline units report suspicious activities. But the information gets filtered through a lens of assumption. Every piece of evidence that suggests a German build-up gets explained as defensive preparations or local adjustments. The cognitive bias is so strong that even when the attack begins, some Allied commanders initially refuse to believe it's a major offensive, thinking it must be a limited spoiling attack. The Germans achieve something that should be impossible in modern warfare: complete strategic surprise against an enemy that can read your communications. As December 16th approaches, the German soldiers moving into attack positions, we understand they're attempting something desperate. These are not the confident troops who marched across Europe in 1940. These are veterans of the Eastern Front, boys too young to shave, and old men called back from retirement. The panzer divisions that will lead the attack include some of the most elite units. Germany has left the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth, but even these units are shadows of their former strength. Tanks are a mixture of modern Panthers and older Panzer IVs, with fuel tanks half empty because there isn't enough gasoline to fill them. The infantry divisions include Volksgrenadier units, People's Grenadiers, ordinary Germans given 6 weeks of training and told to hold a rifle. The artillery that will fire the opening barrage has been assembled by stripping guns from every other sector of the front, creating local superiority by accepting weakness everywhere else. It's Germany's last reserve, the final accumulation of military strength thrown into one enormous gamble. If it succeeds, the war continues. If it fails, Germany has nothing left. In 60 hours, 2,000 guns will fire. In 60 hours, the gamble begins, and Hitler, studying his maps in the bunker, believes with absolute certainty that this time history will bend to his will. He's wrong. But it will take 41 days and 60,000 casualties to prove it. December 16th, 1944, 11 o'clock in the morning. The column stretches back through the forest as far as anyone can see. 117 tanks, 149 half-tracks, 18 self-propelled guns, and 5,000 men organised into a formation the Germans call a Kampfgruppe, a battle group built for a single purpose: punch through enemy lines and don't stop until you reach the objective. This particular Kampfgruppe is commanded by Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, a 29-year-old SS officer who has spent 4 years fighting on the Eastern Front and who approaches warfare with the cold efficiency of someone who stopped thinking of the enemy as human beings somewhere outside Kharkov. His orders are simple: drive west, capture the bridges over the Meuse River between Rhein and Liège, open the route to Antwerp. He has 70 hours to cover 90 miles. The schedule's impossible. Peiper knows it's impossible. He's going to attempt it anyway. Behind him, German artillery is still pounding American positions. Ahead, through the fog and smoke, lies the Losheim Gap, and beyond that, open road. The lead tanks roll forward, engines roaring, treads chewing frozen ground. The spearhead is moving. The composition of Kampfgruppe Peiper reveals everything about what Germany has left to gamble. At the front are 11 King Tiger tanks, the heaviest and most powerful tanks in the world, 70-ton monsters with armour so thick that no Allied tank gun can penetrate them frontally. Behind them are Panthers, the German answer to Soviet 34s, fast and deadly, with high-velocity 75mm guns. Mixed in are older Panzer IVs, reliable, workhorses that have been fighting since 1939. The infantry riding in half-tracks are Waffen-SS, selected for aggression and indoctrinated with Nazi ideology that makes them both effective soldiers and prone to atrocities. These aren't regular army troops who might still observe the conventions of warfare. These are true believers, men who fought at Kursk and Kharkov, who retreated across Russia, burning everything behind them, who understand that Germany is losing and who have been told this offensive is the last chance to change that outcome. Peiper himself is a complex figure, tactically brilliant, personally brave, and completely ruthless. He was once an adjutant to Heinrich Himmler. He has operated on the Eastern Front where warfare had no rules. Now he's been given the most important mission of Germany's last offensive. He will not let rules stand in his way. The first obstacle is the Losheim Gap itself, and it falls faster than anyone expected. The American cavalry units screening the gap are light forces meant for reconnaissance, not sustained combat against heavy armour. When the King Tigers appear out of the fog, there's a brief exchange of fire that illuminates nothing except how outmatched the defenders are. A 37mm anti-tank gun fires at a King Tiger and watches its shell bounce off the frontal armour like a thrown stone. The King Tiger rotates its turret, fires once, and the American gun position ceases to exist. The pattern repeats across the gap, American units engaging, realising they can't stop what's coming at them, and making the rational decision to retreat or be annihilated. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Peiper's column is through the gap and advancing west. They've covered 5 miles. They have 85 miles to go. The roads ahead are narrow, winding through small Belgian villages with stone buildings and medieval streets never designed for tank traffic. Every village is a potential choke point. Every bridge is critical. Peiper pushes his column forward at maximum speed, knowing that hesitation kills momentum, and momentum is the only thing that might make this insane mission possible. December 17th, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The crossroads at Bastogne, near the town of Malmedy. Peiper's lead elements have been advancing for nearly 30 hours with minimal sleep, living on amphetamines that German forces distribute to maintain alertness. They're ahead of schedule but low on fuel, a problem that will become critical within 24 hours. At the crossroads, they encounter an American convoy, Battery B, of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, moving south with no idea that German armour has broken through. It's not a combat unit. They're artillerymen with no heavy weapons, no anti-tank guns, nothing that can stop a Panther tank. The Germans open fire. American trucks explode, burning diesel pouring across the icy road. The survivors bail out, hands up, surrendering. There are about 120 of them standing in a frozen field while German soldiers disarm them and search for officers. Then something happens that will define how this battle is remembered. The SS troops begin executing the prisoners. Systematic murder, machine gun fire into unarmed men, pistol shots for anyone still moving. 84 Americans die in that field. 43 survive by feigning death, lying among the corpses while German soldiers walk among them, shooting anything that moves. The Malmedy Massacre, as it will be known, transforms the character of the Battle of the Bulge. News of the killing spreads through American units within hours, carried by survivors and refugees, amplified by rage and fear. The effect on American combat behaviour is immediate and profound. The U.S. Army in Europe has generally fought by the rules. Prisoners are taken, wounded enemies are treated, medical facilities are respected. After Malmedy, that changes. Units encountering SS soldiers stop taking prisoners. Wounded Germans are shot where they lie. The attitude becomes visceral and widespread. Waffen-SS marked for death. No exceptions, no mercy. This shift in behaviour will matter in ways that are hard to quantify but impossible to ignore. German units that might have surrendered instead fight to the death because they expect no quarter. American troops that might have paused to secure prisoners instead push forward without delay. The battle becomes more savage, more personal. A descent into a kind of warfare the Western Front hasn't seen since the trenches of World War I. And Peiper, whether he personally ordered the executions or simply allowed his troops to commit them, has ensured that his name will be forever associated with war crimes. But that judgment is for later. Right now, in this moment, he's still advancing, still racing toward the Meuse, still believing his mission might succeed. 6:00 p.m., December 17th. The town of Stavelot sits astride a bridge over the Amblève River, and that bridge is the only route west for Peiper's heavy armour. American engineers have prepared it for demolition, wide with explosives, ready to blow. When Peiper's tanks appear, there's a brief, confused firefight in the darkness. The Americans try to blow the bridge. The detonator fails. Engineers run forward trying to light fuses manually while machine gun fire cuts through the air around them. One succeeds. The explosion tears through the bridge's western span. But not cleanly. The bridge is damaged, but still standing, still passable for tanks if they're careful. Peiper doesn't hesitate. His tanks cross while American infantry fires from buildings on the opposite bank. It's close-quarters urban combat, tank guns blasting buildings at point-blank range, infantry with bazookas trying to hit vulnerable rear armour, everyone shooting at everyone in the darkness. By midnight, Stavelot is in German hands. Peiper's column continues west. They're now 50 miles behind American lines, deeper than any other German unit, and there's nothing organised between them and the Meuse, except scattered rear area units that were never supposed to face combat. December 18th, morning. Peiper reaches the fuel depot at Staumont, and for one shining moment, it looks like Hitler's crazy plan might actually work. The depot is huge, 2 million gallons of fuel stored in jerry cans and drums, enough to keep his entire Kampfgruppe supplied for weeks. His tanks are running on fumes. His vehicles are stretched out along 20 miles of road behind him. This fuel depot could save the entire offensive. Peiper's lead elements roll into the depot area expecting to capture it intact, expecting to refuel and continue to the Meuse. Instead, they find American engineers have set the entire facility on fire. 2 million gallons of gasoline burning in a column of black smoke visible for miles. The heat is so intense it melts paint off nearby buildings. Peiper's soldiers watch their salvation go up in flames, and the realization hits they're not going to capture American fuel. They're going to have to survive on what they brought with them, and what they brought wasn't enough. The plan, already stretched beyond breaking, just broke. Peiper doesn't know this yet. He orders his column forward toward La Gleize, the last village before the open run to the Meuse. But the mathematics of fuel and distance are already writing his defeat. By the evening of December 18th, Peiper realizes he's in serious trouble. His column has advanced farther and faster than any other German unit 70 miles in less than 70 hours, an achievement that on paper looks like the Blitzkrieg reborn. But he's also outrun his supply lines, his infantry support, and his ability to defend his flanks. American forces have retaken Stavelot behind him, cutting his route back to German lines. He's surrounded in Gleize with 800 men, 70 tanks, and maybe 5,000 gallons of fuel, enough to move 10 or 15 miles if everything runs perfectly. Ahead lies the Meuse River, just 8 miles away. He can see the church steeples of Dinant in his binoculars, but 8 miles might as well be 800. He has no fuel to get there. Even if he did, American reinforcements are flooding into the area, the 82nd Airborne has established blocking positions, the 3rd Armoured Division is moving up, artillery is registering on every approach route. The window of opportunity that existed for the first 2 days has closed. Now Peiper is trapped, and the only question is whether he can escape before the trap kills him. December 19th through 23rd. Gleize becomes a pocket of desperate German resistance surrounded by tightening American pressure. Artillery pounds the village, continuously 105mm shells every 3 or 4 minutes, day and night. Methodical destruction. Buildings collapse. Walls cave in. German wounded fill the cellars because there's nowhere else to put them. Peiper's tanks, immobilized by lack of fuel, are used as fixed artillery, firing their main guns at American positions until ammunition runs out. On December 23rd, the weather clears. American P-47 fighter bombers appear overhead, and what follows is systematic annihilation. The pilots can see everything. Tanks, half-tracks, supply vehicles, all stationary targets. They make pass after pass, dropping bombs and firing rockets, destroying vehicles one by one, while German soldiers watch helplessly. The Luftwaffe, which was supposed to provide air cover, manages exactly 6 sorties over the entire Bulge battlefield on December 23rd. The Americans fly 5,000. Peiper watches his Kampfgruppe die from the air, watches the vehicles he fought so hard to get this far being turned into burning wrecks, and understands the offensive is over. December 24th, 2 o'clock in the morning. Peiper makes the only decision left. His soldiers will abandon all vehicles and escape on foot through the forests, trying to reach German lines 40 miles east. It's a death sentence for the wounded. They can't be carried that far, and leaving them means abandoning them to American capture. Peiper does something unexpected. He leaves behind 28 American prisoners under care of a German medic with instructions to surrender them to the first American unit that arrives. It's a strange gesture of humanity from a man whose troops executed prisoners 3 days earlier. Maybe it's calculation, hoping that sparing these prisoners will result in better treatment for his own wounded. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe he's trying to balance some internal moral equation. Whatever the motivation, it happens. Then, in darkness and snow, 800 German soldiers slip out of Gleize and disappear into the forests. Behind them, they leave 135 vehicles, including all 11 King Tigers that began the advance. American forces entering Gleize the next morning find a graveyard of German armour, the most powerful tank unit in the offensive, reduced to burning metal and corpses. Of the 5,000 men who began the advance with Kampfgruppe Peiper, 800 survived to reach German lines. The spearhead went deepest, achieved most, and died furthest from home. The high water mark of Hitler's offensive is a village filled with destroyed tanks and the smoke from 2 million gallons of fuel that burned instead of fueling the drive to Antwerp. Peiper will survive the war and face trial for the Malmedy massacre. But his military reputation ends here, in a Belgian village, 8 miles short of the objective, watching his last chance at victory disappear into winter fog. December 16th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Captain William Thompson stands in what used to be a command post and is now a smoking crater surrounded by splintered trees and dead soldiers. He commands Company C of the 422nd Infantry Regiment, 106th Division, and 6 hours ago he knew exactly where his unit was, where the enemy was, and what his mission entailed. Now he knows nothing. The field telephone is dead. The radio gives only static. His company has been split by German penetrations, half his men are missing, and he has no idea if the positions to his left and right still exist. What he does know is that German troops are moving through the forest behind him, that artillery fire is coming from directions that should be friendly territory, and that the carefully organised defensive line he was holding has dissolved into chaos. Thompson's experience is being repeated at every level of command across the 85-mile front. The Ghost Front isn't collapsing uniformly, it's fragmenting, breaking into hundreds of isolated unit actions, each one a desperate small battle where the only objective is surviving until dark. The Schnee Eifel is a forested ridgeline that on December 15th seemed like decent defensive terrain and on December 16th became a trap. 2 regiments of the 106th Infantry Division, the 422nd and the 423rd, roughly 6,000 men are positioned along the ridgeline facing east toward Germany. It's good ground for defence, clear fields of fire. Excellent observation. The problem is that German forces have attacked around both flanks, and by mid-afternoon, on December 16th, these 2 regiments are surrounded. Not in danger of being surrounded, actually surrounded with German units to their front, both flanks and rear. The division commander orders them to hold in place, insisting that relief is coming. But relief isn't coming. The units that might have helped are fighting for their own survival. December 17th passes with the encircled regiments waiting for a breakout order that never arrives. December 18th, the same. By December 19th, they're out of ammunition, out of food, and out of hope. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the commanders of both regiments order their troops to destroy weapons and surrender. 8,000 Americans march into captivity, the largest American surrender since Bastogne in 1942. It's a catastrophe that barely registers in the larger battle because so many catastrophes are happening simultaneously. Vith is a small Belgian market town that sits at the intersection of 5 roads, and those roads are the reason it matters. Control Street Vith, and you control movement through the northern Ardennes. Lose Street Vith, and the German advance becomes a flood with no obstacles. On December 17th, Brigadier General Bruce Clark arrives in Street Vith to find organised chaos. The town is filling with retreating American units, fragments of the 106th Division, engineer units, artillery battalions that have lost their guns, individual soldiers who got separated from their units and are trying to find friendly lines. Clark has brought elements of the 7th Armoured Division, and together with the defenders already in place, he organises something that barely qualifies as a defence, but that will hold for 6 critical days. The German 5th Panzer Army needs Street Vith immediately. Their timetable allows for capturing it on December 17th. Instead, they get a fight that turns into a meat grinder, street by street, building by building, American troops buying time with their lives. December 18th, Clairvaux. The medieval castle dominates the town, stone walls 3 feet thick, built to withstand sieges from an age when warfare moved at the speed of horses. Now it's the last stronghold of the 110th Infantry Regiment, surrounded by German armour that's shelling it with direct-fire tank guns at ranges measured in yards. Inside the castle, 200 Americans are making a last stand that nobody watching thinks they'll survive. They have no anti-tank weapons left. Food is running out. The radio that connected them to regiment is destroyed. Lieutenant Colonel Hurley Fuller, the regimental commander, knows his unit is finished but orders continued resistance because every hour they hold is an hour that American forces behind them can establish defensive positions. The Germans bring up 88mm guns and methodically blast holes in the castle walls. By evening, German infantry is inside the castle, fighting room to room with grenades and submachine guns. The Americans surrender at 9 p.m. Fuller and most of his men become prisoners. The 110th Infantry Regiment ceases to exist. But they held Clairvaux for 2 days, and those 2 days matter in the accumulated mathematics of delay that's killing the German timetable. December 18th, the road to Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division is supposed to be resting in camps around Rheims, France, recovering from the disastrous Operation Market Garden 2 months earlier. Instead, they're being loaded onto trucks in emergency deployment, racing north through darkness toward a battle nobody fully understands yet. The men climbing into the trucks are paratroopers, elite infantry trained for rapid deployment behind enemy lines, but they're not prepared for sustained defensive operations. They have no winter clothing, they're wearing summer weight uniforms because their winter gear is still in quartermaster warehouses, they have minimal ammunition because the division was supposed to be in reserve, they have no heavy weapons beyond mortars and machine guns because you don't need artillery when you're jumping from airplanes, And they're heading into a situation where they'll be outnumbered 3-1 by German forces that include heavy armour. The convoy moves through the night, headlights off, drivers navigating by moonlight, racing against German columns that are also converging on Bastogne. It's a race that will be won or lost by hours, and nobody in those trucks knows if they're driving toward a battle they can fight or a trap they can't escape. The scale of the German assault is revealing itself through the accumulation of fragmentary reports at headquarters. Attacks confirmed at Monschau in the north, breakthrough at Losheim Gap, heavy fighting around Street, Vith, Clairvaux falling, Germans reported at Houffalize, at Trois Ponts, approaching Bastogne. The map at 1st Army headquarters accumulates red marks like a spreading infection, each mark representing a reported German position. By December 18th, the map is more red than blue across an area the size of Rhode Island. The staff officers trying to make sense of the reports face an impossible task. They're receiving information that's hours old by the time it reaches them, about battles that have already been decided, from units that may no longer exist. The communications infrastructure has collapsed, field telephone lines are cut, radio frequencies are jammed or simply overwhelmed by the volume of traffic. Runners sent between units often never arrive. The command structure is flying blind, making decisions based on incomplete information about a situation that's changing faster than they can understand. At Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, the scale of the crisis is taking time to penetrate the institutional optimism. Eisenhower's Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, initially tells concerned officers that the German attack is giving us a great opportunity to kill them. The thinking is that Germany is exposing forces to destruction that would have been safer in defensive positions. It's not entirely wrong, ultimately. The Battle of the Bulge will destroy Germany's strategic reserve and hasten the end of the war. But in the moment, on December 17th and 18th, that eventual outcome is far from certain. What is certain is that American forces are being pushed back, that entire units are surrounded or destroyed, that German columns are advancing farther and faster than should be possible. Eisenhower makes several critical decisions in quick succession. All offensive operations stop immediately. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions deploy to the Ardennes. Reserves in England prepare for emergency deployment. Most importantly, he resists the temptation to immediately counterattack, instead focusing on establishing a solid defensive line and letting the Germans advance into a killing box where American advantages in artillery and air power can destroy them. It's the right strategy, but it requires accepting territory losses and American casualties that are psychologically difficult for a command structure that's been winning for 6 months. The individual experiences of soldiers caught in the collapse are remarkably similar, despite being separated by miles and differing circumstances. Confusion, communication breakdown, orders that don't match reality, units discovering they're cut off. The decision to fight, surrender, or try to escape through German lines. Private James Larkey of the 424th Infantry Regiment finds himself separated from his unit after a German attack scatters his company. He spends 3 days moving west through forests, hiding from German patrols, living on food scrapped from abandoned American positions. When he finally reaches friendly lines, he discovers his company is listed as destroyed and most of his friends are dead or captured. Sergeant Michael O'Brien of the 9th Armoured Division watches his tank platoon get ambushed by German armour, sees 3 of 4 tanks in his platoon destroyed in 30 seconds, bails out of his burning Sherman and escapes on foot. He reaches American lines 48 hours later with burns on his hands and no idea if anyone else from his crew survived. These stories, multiplied by thousands, are the human reality of what headquarters calls the situation in the Ardennes. It's not a situation. It's chaos given organisational structure. But not every unit breaks. Not every position falls. Scattered across the battlefield are acts of resistance that don't stop the German advance, but that slow it, delay it, force costly detours and time-consuming reductions of strong points. Near Krinkelt-Rocherath, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions fight a meeting engagement against the 12th SS Panzer Division and stop them cold, holding a road junction that's critical for German movement north. The Germans expect to brush aside American resistance and be through the villages in hours. Instead, they get a 2-day battle that cost them dozens of tanks and hundreds of infantry casualties. Near Trois Ponts, American engineers blow a bridge literally seconds before German tanks can cross. forcing a massive detour that costs Kampfgruppe Peiper 10 critical hours. At dozens of crossroads and small villages, American units make the decision to stand and fight rather than retreat, trading their lives for time. These aren't the dramatic battles that make it into history books. They're the nameless, unrecorded actions that collectively determine whether Germany advances 20 miles per day as planned or 5 miles per day as actually happens. The difference between those numbers is the difference between possible German victory and certain German defeat. By December 19th, 72 hours into the offensive, the pattern is clear. The German attack has achieved tactical surprise and created a huge bulge in the American line. But it hasn't achieved the breakthrough that Hitler's plan requires. American units are battered but not destroyed, retreating but not routed, fragmenting but not dissolving. The road junctions at Street Vith and Bastogne are still in American hands. The Meuse River bridges are still 30 miles from the nearest German spearhead. Most critically, American reserves are flooding into the region faster than German forces can exploit their initial success. The battle that was supposed to be over in 72 hours, German armour at the Meuse, American units encircled and destroyed, is instead turning into a massive slugging match where both sides are pouring in reinforcements, and the question becomes which side can sustain the losses longer. The Ghost Front has collapsed, but it hasn't been overrun. It's been transformed into a chaotic battlefield where hundreds of separate actions are determining an outcome that nobody yet understands. The next week will determine whether this is Germany's last victory or America's temporary setback. But here, at the 72-hour mark, with Street, Vith holding, and Bastogne surrounded, the answer could still go either way. December 20th, 1944, evening. The last road into Bastogne closes like a noose tightening. A German armoured column cuts through the village of Sibret on the southwestern approach, and with that, the encirclement is complete. Inside the town, 18,000 American soldiers realise they're surrounded by roughly 45,000 Germans. The soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division have been in Bastogne for less than 48 hours, barely enough time to establish defensive positions, certainly not enough time to stockpile the ammunition and supplies needed for a sustained siege. They arrived with what they could carry in the trucks that brought them one day's rations, minimal medical supplies, no winter clothing. Now the trucks are gone, the roads are held by Germans, and the only way in or out is by air, assuming the weather ever clears enough for aircraft to fly. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, the acting division commander, gathers his staff in a cellar that serves as headquarters. Someone asks about withdrawal. McAuliffe looks at the map, showing German positions in every direction, and says something that will define the battle. They've got us surrounded, the poor bastards. It's bravado masking genuine concern, but it's exactly the kind of defiant attitude that turns desperate situations into legendary stands. Bastogne matters for reasons that are purely geographic. 7 paved roads converge on the town like spokes on a wheel, and those roads are the only way for German armour to move west through the southern Ardennes. The region's terrain is difficult: hills, forests, valleys, with streams that tanks can't ford. The roads are essential. Hitler's plan requires German armoured divisions to use these roads to reach the Meuse River. If Bastogne stays in American hands, German armour has to detour on secondary roads. Narrow tracks that slow movement to a crawl and create bottlenecks where entire divisions stack up, waiting to advance. The German High Command knows this. Their operations orders explicitly state that Bastogne must be captured by December 19th at the latest. Now it's December 20th, the town is still in American hands, and 3 German divisions are being diverted from the westward advance to reduce it. Every hour those divisions spend fighting for Bastogne is an hour they're not driving toward Antwerp. The strategic mathematics are brutal and simple: hold Bastogne, and the German offensive bogs down. Lose Bastogne, and the breakthrough accelerates. Everything depends on whether the 101st Airborne can hold until relief arrives. The defenders are an improvised collection of units that barely constitute a coherent force. The 101st Airborne forms the core paratroopers, who are trained for aggressive assault operations, not prolonged defence. Supporting them are remnants of the 9th and 10th Armoured Divisions, tank units that got cut off during the German advance and fell back to Bastogne. There's the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion with towed 3-inch guns that can kill German tanks if they get close enough. There are artillery battalions, engineer companies, Even Cooks and Clarks issued rifles and sent to man defensive positions. McAuliffe organises this mixed force into a perimeter defence, parcelling out the limited anti-tank weapons to positions where German armour is most likely to attack. The problem is that German armour can attack from any direction because German forces surround the entire town. The Americans establish 8 roadblocks on the main approaches, dig in their few tanks and tank destroyers, and prepare to fight a 360-degree battle where the front line is everywhere. December 21st. The ammunition crisis becomes acute. Artillery is the American army's greatest advantage, massive firepower that can break up German attacks before they reach American lines. But artillery requires shells, and shells require trucks to deliver them, and the trucks can't reach Bastogne anymore. McAuliffe's artillery commander reports they have 2,400 shells remaining across all batteries. In a normal defensive battle, that's maybe 6 hours of sustained fire. Here, surrounded and facing attacks from multiple directions, it might be less. McAuliffe issues the order that every artillery officer dreads: 10 shells per gun per day. The artillery crews, accustomed to firing hundreds of rounds during battles, are now rationed to 10. They have to let German attacks develop fully before engaging, have to watch enemy troops mass without firing, waiting until the last possible moment to make every shell count. The psychological pressure is immense, knowing you have the firepower to stop an attack, but being forbidden to use it until you're certain of success. Meanwhile, German artillery has no such restrictions. They pound Bastogne continuously, methodically, destroying buildings, cutting communications lines, searching for American ammunition dumps and command posts. December 22nd, 11:30 in the morning, 4 German officers approach American lines under a white flag of truce. They're carrying a typed document, a formal surrender ultimatum addressed to the American commander of the encircled town of Bastogne. The message is almost polite in its phrasing, acknowledging the gallant fight put up by American troops, but explaining that the fortune of war is changing and that resistance is pointless. The Germans offer honourable terms, surrender now, and all American personnel will receive proper treatment as prisoners of war. Refuse. And the ultimatum warns ominously of total annihilation when German forces assault in overwhelming strength. The German officers expect this message to be taken seriously. They've surrounded the town. They outnumber the defenders more than 2 to 1. They have heavy artillery and armour. What they don't understand is that paratroopers, by definition, are soldiers who volunteer to jump out of airplanes behind enemy lines. Being surrounded doesn't frighten them, it's literally what they train for. McAuliffe reads the ultimatum and his first response is unprintable. His actual words are, "Ah, nuts." A dismissive expression that captures his complete contempt for the German demand. His staff suggests he needs to provide a formal written reply. McAuliffe thinks for a moment and decides his initial response is perfect. He writes on a piece of paper, "To the German commander, nuts." The American commander. It's one word, capitalized for emphasis, followed by his signature. The staff officers delivering the reply to the German representatives have to explain what nuts means, translating it roughly as "go to hell." The Germans are baffled by American slang but understand the sentiment. They withdraw and both sides prepare for the assault everyone knows is coming. Back in the American lines, word of McAuliffe's reply spreads instantly through the defensive positions. Soldiers who were facing the grim prospect of surrender with relief or despair suddenly have something else: defiance. The one-word reply becomes a rallying point, proof that their commander has no intention of giving up. Morale, which had been deteriorating under constant artillery fire and dwindling supplies, stabilizes. If the general thinks they can hold, maybe they can hold. December 23rd, dawn. For the first time in a week, soldiers wake to clear skies. The fog that has blanketed the Ardennes since December 16th is gone, burned off by a high-pressure system moving across Belgium. In Bastogne, American troops stare upward at blue sky and realise what this means: aircraft can fly. Within 2 hours, the roar of engines announces the arrival of C-47 transport planes, dozens of them flying in formation over the town. The cargo doors open and multicoloured parachutes blossom, carrying containers of ammunition, medical supplies, and food. Not everything lands. Inside the American perimeter, some parachutes drift into German positions, and there are firefights as both sides race to recover containers. But most make it through. The ammunition that was down to 200 shells is suddenly replenished with thousands more. The medical supplies that were nearly exhausted are replaced. The psychological impact is even greater than the material benefit. The men holding Bastogne realise they haven't been abandoned. The Air Force knows where they are. Help is coming, even if it has to fall from the sky. The air resupply operation is an extraordinary achievement of coordination and courage. The transport pilots have to fly through German anti-aircraft fire, navigate to a town they can barely see through remaining haze, and drop supplies at low altitude under 500 feet to ensure accuracy. Some planes are shot down. Others take damage and limp back to bases in France trailing smoke. But they keep coming, wave after wave, 200. 41 sorties over the next 4 days, delivering 144 tons of supplies. The loads are prioritised ruthlessly. Ammunition first, medical supplies second, food only if there's space. Artillery shells comprise more than half of every delivery, because artillery is what's keeping German armour from overrunning the defensive perimeter. The resupply doesn't end the siege, but it changes the mathematics. Before December 23rd, Bastogne was a fortress, running out of ammunition. Defenders rationing their last resources, counting down to inevitable defeat. After December 23rd, it's a fortress that can hold indefinitely, as long as the weather permits airdrops and as long as Patton's Third Army can break through from the south. The siege isn't over, but the outcome has shifted from when they fall to when they're relieved. The fighting around Bastogne's perimeter becomes a nightmarish routine of German probing attacks followed by larger assaults when they find weak points. December 23rd, a German panzer division attacks from the northwest, trying to break through to the town centre. American tank destroyers hidden in tree lines ambush the advancing armour, destroying a dozen tanks before being forced to withdraw. December 24th, Christmas Eve, German infantry assaults the village of Chance on the northern perimeter. The fighting goes house to house, grenades through windows, machine guns firing through walls, soldiers killing each other at arm's length in medieval cellars. The Americans hold by meters, losing half the village but preventing a complete breakthrough. December 25th, Christmas Day, the Germans attack from the southeast with a full armoured assault, 50 tanks supported by infantry, the most serious attempt yet to crack the perimeter. American artillery, no longer rationed thanks to air resupply, fires a defensive barrage that destroys 20 German tanks and breaks the attack before it reaches American lines. The pattern repeats across all 8 roadblocks: German attack, American defence, casualties on both sides, and the perimeter holding by increasingly narrow margins. Inside the town, conditions deteriorate despite the air resupply. The German artillery never stops, maintaining a slow, methodical bombardment that destroys buildings and kills soldiers who thought they were in safe areas. The civilian population, thousands of Belgians who couldn't evacuate before the encirclement, shelters in cellars and suffers alongside the military defenders. The cold is relentless, temperatures well below freezing, snow accumulating, and no way to properly heat the buildings because fires draw German artillery. Wounded soldiers fill the aid stations, lying on stone floors because there aren't enough medical supplies for everyone. Doctors perform amputations by flashlight, trying to save men whose frostbitten limbs have turned gangrenous. The dead accumulate faster than graves can be, dug in frozen ground, so bodies are stacked in buildings and covered with snow. It's a medieval siege conducted with 20th century weapons, and everyone trapped inside knows that relief must come soon, or the defence will collapse not from German assault, but from simple attrition, cold, wounds, exhaustion, the accumulated weight of days under fire with no respite. By December 26th, the defenders of Bastogne have held for 6 days against an enemy that outnumbers them more than 2 to 1. They've endured constant artillery, repulsed multiple armoured assaults, survived on airdrop supplies, and refused surrender despite being completely encircled. The nuts! Reply has travelled from mouth to mouth through American units across Europe, becoming a symbol of defiance that resonates far beyond this single besieged town. But symbols don't stop tanks, and ammunition doesn't last forever, and human endurance has limits. McAuliffe knows his troops can't hold indefinitely. The perimeter is shrinking with each German attack. Casualties are mounting. The clear weather that allowed resupply also allows German aircraft to attack, and the Luftwaffe has started bombing runs against American positions. Everything depends on Patton's Third Army breaking through from the south, cutting the German encirclement and reopening the road to Bastogne. Intelligence reports say Third Army is close, maybe 5 miles away, fighting through German positions. 5 miles. In normal circumstances, an hour's march. In combat conditions in winter, against determined resistance, it might as well be 50. The defenders wait and fight and hold because there's nothing else they can do. In cellars and foxholes, American soldiers joke grimly about their situation. They've got us surrounded, the poor bastards. It's not funny anymore, if it ever was. But it's all they have. December 16th through 22nd, 1944. The weather over the Ardennes is Germany's invisible ally and America's worst enemy. Fog so thick that soldiers standing guard can't see their own hands at arm's length. Cloud ceilings at 300 feet, sometimes lower, turning the sky into a grey ceiling that presses down like something physical. Snow mixed with freezing rain that turns roads into ice and forests into obstacle courses. Visibility measured in yards, not miles. Temperatures hovering around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to freeze weapons, numb fingers, and turn foxholes into ice-lined graves. This isn't just bad weather, it's meteorologically perfect conditions for grounding the Allied air forces, and that's exactly why Hitler chose mid-December for his offensive. German meteorologists predicted this weather pattern weeks in advance, forecasting the high-pressure system that would bring persistent fog and low clouds. The Luftwaffe chief, Hermann Göring, promised that these conditions would neutralize Allied air superiority for at least a week. For once, Göring's predictions are correct. For 7 days, the most powerful air force in the world sits grounded, while German tanks advance unopposed from above. The numbers reveal the scale of air power that weather has neutralized. The United States 9th Air Force alone has 2,000 fighter bombers stationed in France and Belgium, P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings designed for ground attack, capable of carrying bombs, rockets, and napalm. The British Royal Air Force contributes another 1,000 tactical aircraft. The 8th Air Force has hundreds of heavy bombers that can obliterate German supply lines. In normal conditions, this air armada flies thousands of sorties per day, appearing over German positions within minutes of any movement, turning roads into killing zones, and making large-scale armour operations suicidal in daylight. But normal conditions require visibility, and visibility doesn't exist in the Ardennes in December 1944. From December 16th through 22nd, the Allied air forces fly fewer than 500 combat sorties, total 500 across 7 days, when normal operations would see that many in 2 hours. The pilots sit in ready rooms, playing cards, staring at weather reports, watching the fog through windows, knowing that somewhere beyond that grey wall, a battle is happening that they could end if they could just get airborne. But you can't fly when you can't see the ground. You can't attack targets, you can't locate. The weather has grounded the Allied advantage. December 20th, IX Tactical Air Command headquarters in Luxembourg. Major General Hoyt Vandenberg stares at meteorological reports with the intensity of someone trying to will them into saying something different. His command controls 2,000 aircraft, but 2,000 aircraft might as well be zero when weather keeps them on the ground. Intelligence reports describe German columns advancing through the Ardennes tanks, trucks, supply convoys, perfect targets, and his pilots can't reach them. Radio intercepts pick up desperate calls from American ground units requesting air support, and he has to tell them no, not because the planes aren't available, but because the planes can't fly in 0-to-0 visibility. The frustration is visceral and shared. Pilots who've flown hundreds of combat missions are grounded by weather, watching the battle develop through intelligence reports, knowing that if they could just get overhead, they could turn the German advance into a massacre. But nature is impartial. The fog that protects German movements also makes flight suicidal. Several aircraft that attempted reconnaissance missions on December 17th and 18th crashed into hillsides they never saw. After that, the order comes down, no flights unless visibility improves. The Air Force, pride of American military power, becomes a spectator to the greatest crisis of the Western European campaign. December 22nd, 3rd Army headquarters in Luxembourg. General George Patton, not a man known for patience or religious observance, summons his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill, Patton has decided that the weather is unacceptable and that divine intervention is required. He orders O'Neill to compose a prayer for good weather. O'Neill, somewhat taken aback, suggests that praying for weather to help kill enemy soldiers might not be theologically appropriate. Patton, according to multiple witnesses, responds with characteristic bluntness. I don't care if it's theologically appropriate. I want a prayer for good weather, and I want it now. O'Neill writes what will become famous as the weather prayer. Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech thee of thy great goodness to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle. Graciously hearken to us as soldiers who call upon thee that, armed with thy power, we may advance from victory to victory and crush the oppression and wickedness of our enemies and establish thy justice among men and nations. Amen. Patton orders the prayer printed and distributed to every man in Third Army. Whether it's divine intervention or simply the natural progression of the high-pressure system, the weather begins to clear the next morning. December 23rd, dawn. The fog lifts like a curtain rising on a stage, revealing the Ardennes battlefield in crystalline winter clarity. The sky is blue for the first time in a week. Visibility extends for miles. And within 2 hours, 5,000 Allied aircraft are airborne. The response is overwhelming and immediate. P-47s from the 9th Air Force attack in waves, 8 aircraft at a time, hitting German columns that have been moving freely for 6 days. P-38s strafe roads where German supply trucks have backed up in traffic jams. British Typhoons fire rockets into German armour concentrations. B-26 medium bombers hit bridges and rail yards behind German lines, cutting supply routes. The Germans, who have been advancing for a week without serious air opposition, suddenly find themselves under attack from an enemy they cannot fight. German soldiers describe December 23rd as a nightmare, endless aircraft, bombs falling constantly, nowhere to hide because the forest canopy that might provide concealment is bare in winter. Columns that were advancing at 15 miles per day on December 20th are immobilized on December 23rd, trapped on roads, unable to move because movement draws immediate air attack. The psychological impact on German forces is catastrophic and immediate. Eastern Front veterans, men who fought the Soviets for years, describe Allied air power as worse than anything they experienced in Russia. The Soviet Air Force, while numerous, never achieved the kind of coordinated, relentless ground attack that the Western Allies employ. On the Eastern Front, air attacks were episodic planes appeared, dropped bombs, left. Here in the Ardennes, the air attacks never stop. Wave after wave of fighter bombers, operating in shifts, maintaining constant pressure. German anti-aircraft guns fire until they overheat, then fire more, but there are too many targets. For every aircraft shot down, 10 more appear. Kampfgruppe Peiper, trapped at the Gleize, loses 30% of its remaining vehicles to air attack on December 23rd and 24th. The 5th Panzer Army reports that forward movement has become impossible during daylight. Units can only move at night, severely limiting operational tempo. By December 24th, the German offensive has effectively stalled, not because ground forces stopped them, but because air power has turned every road into a death trap. December 24th becomes known among pilots as the Turkey Shoot. Fighter bomber squadrons, released from weather constraints, find targets everywhere. German columns backed up for miles on narrow roads. Supply convoys trying to reach forward units. Artillery positions firing on American lines. Every pilot who takes off finds more targets than he has ammunition for. Lieutenant Colonel James Hill of the 9th Air Force's 67th Tactical Reconnaissance Group flies 4 missions on December 24th, destroying 6 German tanks, 14 trucks, and 2 artillery pieces. He describes the experience in his after-action report. Targets of opportunity everywhere, limited only by ammunition capacity. Enemy vehicle density exceeds any observed in prior operations. It's not just tactical aircraft. The 8th Air Force's heavy bombers, normally reserved for strategic targets deep in Germany, are diverted to attack German communication centres and supply dumps just behind the Ardennes front. More than 2,000 heavy bombers hit 11 German towns on December 24th, dropping 5,000 tons of bombs on marshalling yards, supply depots, and troop concentrations. The scale of air attack is unprecedented, 15,000 Allied sorties between December 23rd and 26th, compared to 500 in the previous 7 days. The German offensive, which advanced 60 miles in 7 days under fog, advances less than 5 miles in the next 3 days under clear skies. The German Luftwaffe's attempted response reveals how completely air superiority has shifted since 1940. On December 23rd, German fighters managed 6 sorties over the Ardennes battlefield, 6 total, compared to 5,000 Allied sorties the same day. The disparity is so extreme that American pilots often don't bother trying to intercept German aircraft because the Germans disappear before contact. The Luftwaffe's problems are cumulative and fatal. Fuel shortages mean most fighter squadrons are grounded. Pilot training has been cut to minimal levels. New German pilots have perhaps 30 hours of flight time before being sent to combat, compared to 300 hours for American pilots. Aircraft production can't keep pace with losses. The few German pilots who do get airborne face overwhelming numerical odds. A German fighter encountering Allied aircraft typically finds itself outnumbered 10-1 or worse. The predictable result is that the Luftwaffe stops trying. By December 25th, German fighter operations over the Ardennes have essentially ceased. The skies belong exclusively to the Allies, and that ownership is destroying the German offensive from above. The weather's impact extends beyond air operations into every aspect of the battle. The cold that grounded aircraft also immobilizes soldiers. Frostbite becomes as dangerous as enemy fire. American medical units treat 15,000 cold weather injuries during the Battle of the Bulge, thousands requiring amputations of fingers, toes, or limbs. Weapons malfunction in the extreme cold. Mungerand. Rifles jam because firing pin springs lose tension at low temperatures. Machine guns freeze because lubricant congeals. Tank engines refuse to start without extended warming. The same conditions affect German forces. Their vehicles break down, their weapons malfunction, their soldiers suffer from exposure. But the Germans have one advantage. They're attacking, which means moving, which generates body heat. American troops defending fixed positions stand in foxholes for hours in sub-freezing temperatures, unable to light fires because fires draw artillery, slowly freezing despite multiple layers of clothing. The cold kills indiscriminately. A soldier falls asleep in his foxhole and doesn't wake up. A tank crew member touches bare metal with bare skin and loses the skin. Wounded soldiers die from exposure before medics can reach them. The weather is an enemy that affects both sides, but it amplifies every other hardship of combat until the line between enemy action and environmental conditions blurs into a single hostile force. By December 26th, the weather war has been decisively won by the Allies, but not through any action of their own. They were simply better positioned to exploit the weather when it changed. The 7 days of fog allowed Germany to achieve tactical surprise and advance deeper than should have been possible. But that same fog couldn't last forever, and when it cleared, Allied air power returned with devastating effect. The Germans needed 14 days of bad weather to reach the Meuse River, and possibly 3 weeks to reach Antwerp. They got 7 days. Those 7 days allowed them to advance 60 miles and create the Bulge that gives the battle its name. But when the weather cleared on December 23rd, their offensive effectively ended. They could still fight, still attack, still inflict casualties, but the operational mobility required for a breakthrough disappeared under constant air attack. German vehicles abandoned on Ardennes roads in late December show an interesting pattern. Many are undamaged by ground fire but destroyed from above, or simply abandoned when fuel ran out because supply convoys couldn't reach them through Allied air interdiction. The weather didn't determine who won the Battle of the Bulge, but it determined how long the battle lasted and how much damage Germany could inflict before inevitable defeat. Hitler's meteorologists gave him 7 days. He needed at least 14. The difference between those numbers is measured in burning tanks, destroyed vehicles, and the corpses of soldiers who advanced too far under fog and couldn't retreat under clear skies. December 17th, 1944, evening. Brigadier General Bruce Clark drives into the Belgian town of Street. Vith expecting to establish a rest area and instead finds chaos organised, just barely enough to avoid complete collapse. The roads are clogged with retreating American vehicles, trucks, jeeps, artillery, pieces, soldiers on foot, all moving west, away from the German breakthrough. Nobody seems to know where their units are. Officers shout contradictory orders. Communications are broken. Clark, who's brought elements of the 7th Armoured Division to reinforce what he thought was a stable sector, realizes within minutes that there's no stable sector anywhere near Street Vith. The town is filling with fragments of destroyed units, survivors of the German assault, men who've been fighting for 30 hours without rest, and who keep saying the same things. They're everywhere. Tanks behind us. Whole division gone. Clark finds a functioning radio and contacts his division commander, who tells him to organise whatever you can find and hold Street Vith. It's an impossible mission. He has perhaps 5,000 effective troops in his immediate command. Intelligence reports, fragmentary and contradictory, suggest at least 5 German divisions converging on Street Vith from 3 directions. The math doesn't work. But Clark is a career officer who's spent 3 years fighting Germans across North Africa and Europe, and he understands something critical. Street Vith's road network makes it the hinge on which the entire northern German advance depends. Hold Street Vith, and you block German movement. Lose Street Vith, and the northern offensive floods west unimpeded. He begins organising a defence built from whatever he can find. Street Vith sits in a valley, surrounded by forested hills, unremarkable except for its geography. 5 paved roads converge on the town like fingers closing into a fist. In the Ardennes, where most roads are narrow tracks that become impassable mud in winter, paved roads are everything. They're the only routes that can handle heavy military traffic tanks, supply trucks, artillery tractors. Control those roads, and you control movement through the entire region. The German 5th Panzer Army's operational plan explicitly requires capturing Street Vith by December 17th to maintain schedule. Their armoured divisions need those roads to continue west toward the Meuse River. The plan allows for light resistance, maybe a few hours of fighting to clear American remnants. What they encounter instead is Clark's improvised defence, remnants of the 106th Infantry Division that escaped the Schnee-Eifel encirclement, Combat Command B of the 7th Armoured Division, the 424th Infantry Regiment, elements of the 9th Armoured Division, a few scattered artillery battalions, and even some engineer units pressed into service as infantry. It's not a proper defensive force, it's what one officer describes as organised chaos. Emphasis on organised. But it's in Street Vith, holding 5 critical roads, and the Germans need it gone. December 18th. The German assault begins with artillery. Always artillery. The German answer to every tactical problem. Shells pound the town systematically, searching for American positions, destroying buildings, forcing defenders to shelter in cellars. Then come the probing attacks, infantry companies advancing through the forests surrounding the town, trying to find weak points in American lines. They find American machine guns instead, positioned on hillsides with clear fields of fire, mowing down Germans who expected to walk through scattered resistance. One German infantry regiment loses 300 men in 6 hours trying to take a single hill northeast of town. The Americans hold, not through superior numbers or equipment, but through superior position and the kind of desperate determination that comes from knowing there's nowhere to retreat to, behind Street Vith lie the remnants of the entire 1st Army supply network. If Street Vith falls, those supplies become German supplies. The defenders understand what they're defending, not a Belgian town most of them can't pronounce, but the logistics that keep the American army functioning. December 19th through 21st. Street Vith becomes a case study in defensive combat against overwhelming odds. The Germans bring up armour, Panzer IVs and Panthers, supported by infantry and artillery, assaulting from 3 directions. The Americans have some tank destroyers, a few Sherman tanks, and artillery that's down to rationed ammunition. But they have something the Germans don't: excellent defensive terrain. The forests around Street Vith are dense with underbrush, limiting visibility to yards. Roads through the forests are narrow and winding, perfect ambush terrain. American tank destroyers hide in tree lines, waiting until German tanks come within 200 yards before firing. The German armour advantage means nothing at close range when a thin-skinned M18 Hellcat can penetrate a Panther's side armour. The pattern repeats across the defensive perimeter, German attacks advancing confidently, running into prepared American positions, taking casualties, withdrawing to regroup. Each attack fails to break through. Each attack costs the Germans time they can't afford. The German 5th Panzer Army's schedule called for being 30 miles west of Street Vith by December 21st. Instead, they're still fighting for Street Vith itself, 6 days behind schedule. The The fighting in Vith streets reveals the brutal intimacy of urban combat. German and American forces sometimes occupy opposite ends of the same street, firing at each other past burning buildings. German 88mm guns positioned on hills outside town fire directly into buildings, blasting through walls to kill soldiers sheltering inside. American artillery responds with time-delayed fuses, creating airbursts over German infantry in the open. One American artillery officer describes the psychological warfare aspect. We'd wait until we heard them massing for an assault. You could hear the voices, the equipment rattling. Then we'd drop a concentration of fire right on the assembly area. After a few times, you could hear the panic in their voices. They learned to dread our artillery. The Germans bring in assault guns, Sturmgeschütz 3s, with low-profile 75mm guns, designed specifically for urban warfare. The Americans respond by mining streets and using bazooka teams in buildings, hunting the assault guns from above. Neither side can achieve decisive advantage. Both sides bleed. December 21st brings the German fuel crisis to Vith's doorstep. A German panzer division positioned to assault the town from the north reports it's immobilized, out of fuel, unable to attack or even reposition. This division is supposed to be leading the breakthrough west. Instead, it's sitting static, waiting for fuel convoys that aren't coming because Allied air power is destroying supply lines. The delay cascades through the entire German operational schedule. The division that was supposed to support the northern assault is delayed. The division behind that one stacks up on narrow roads, waiting. The assault that was supposed to overwhelm Street, Vith on December 21st, doesn't happen until December 22nd, then gets postponed to December 23rd. Each 24-hour delay means more American reinforcements arrive, more defensive positions get prepared, more artillery registers on German approach routes. The defenders of Street, Vith, are buying time with their lives, but they're also being given time by German logistics failures. The combination is lethal to German operational planning. December 22nd, Clark realizes his defensive perimeter is collapsing inward like a deflating balloon. German attacks from three sides have pushed American positions back toward the town center. The defensive horseshoe that protected Street. Vith is compressing into a tight semicircle. Casualties are mounting. 3,000 men lost in 5 days, either killed, wounded, or cut off and presumed captured. Ammunition is critically low. The artillery batteries that have been breaking up German attacks are down to 50 shells per gun, maybe 6 hours of sustained fire. Medical facilities are overwhelmed, cellars full of wounded men lying on stone floors, and, most critically, German forces have pushed around both flanks of Vith, threatening to encircle the town completely. Clark contacts his superiors and requests permission to withdraw. The response is what he expects but doesn't want to hear. Hold as long as possible. It's not a military order, it's a death sentence, phrased politely. Everyone understands what as long as possible means. Fight until you're overrun, or until ammunition runs out. Then surrender or die. Clark conveys this to his subordinate commanders without sugarcoating it. They begin planning a withdrawal that nobody is authorized to execute. December 23rd, early morning. The order finally comes, withdraw from Vith. Not because High Command suddenly decided to be merciful, but because the tactical situation has changed. The 82nd Airborne Division has established a new defensive line 10 miles west of Vith. If the 7th Armoured can reach that line, they'll survive to fight again. If they stay in Vith another day, they'll be encircled and destroyed. The withdrawal begins at 2 a.m, in darkness, through forests, on roads that are barely roads. American units move in stages, rearguard fights while main body withdraws, then the rearguard leapfrogs through the main body and the new rearguard fights. It's textbook maneuver executed under nightmare conditions. German forces, realizing the Americans are escaping, launch attacks trying to cut off the withdrawal, fighting in darkness, vehicles navigating forest trails without headlights. Wounded soldiers carried on improvised stretchers, artillery firing continuously to cover the retreat. It's chaos controlled just enough to avoid becoming disaster. By dawn on December 23rd, most of the 7th Armoured Division has escaped Vith. The Germans occupy the town by mid-morning. They've won the tactical objective, but they've lost 6 days. The historical assessment of Vith takes decades to crystallize, but eventually, military historians reach consensus. Vith was more important than Bastogne to the battle's outcome, even though Bastogne received far more attention. Bastogne was dramatic, symbolic, the location of McAuliffe's defiant nuts reply. But Bastogne was always going to hold because it received rapid reinforcement, air resupply, and Patton's relief within a week. Vith had none of those advantages. It was defended by an improvised force that shouldn't have held for 6 hours, let alone 6 days. But those 6 days destroyed the German operational timetable beyond recovery. Hitler's plan required the 5th Panzer Army to reach the Meuse River by December 22nd or 23rd. On December 23rd, they were still fighting west of Vith, 40 miles from the Meuse. The critical roadnet they needed for rapid advance had been denied to them during the exact period when denial mattered most. British military historian John Keegan later wrote that Vith was probably the most decisive defensive action by American forces in the entire Northwest Europe campaign. The soldiers who held Vith didn't get the glory or the headlines. Many of them died or spent the rest of the war in prisoner of war camps. But they bought the time that allowed the Allied response to organise, and time was the one resource the Germans didn't have. By December 25th, as German forces finally push west of Vith, the damage has been done. The northern German advance, which was supposed to be the main effort of the entire offensive, has been delayed to the point of operational irrelevance. German armour that should be approaching the Meuse River is still 50 miles east, struggling through forests against American defensive lines that grow stronger every day. The fuel shortage that delayed attacks on Vith has become catastrophic. German panzer divisions are reporting 60% of their vehicles immobilised by lack of fuel. Allied air power, grounded during Vith's siege, but now operating in clear weather, is destroying German supply lines and hunting tanks on every road. The town that was supposed to fall in hours, that might have been bypassed if the roads weren't essential, instead became a 6-day battle that consumed German momentum and revealed the fundamental flaw in Hitler's plan. You can't achieve blitzkrieg without logistics, and Germany's logistics had failed before the first tank crossed the Belgian border. Vith stands, in historical memory, as proof that sometimes the quiet victories matter more than the dramatic ones. The soldiers holding that cold Belgian town didn't know they were winning the battle. They thought they were losing slowly. Only later would anyone understand that. Slow losing, in this context, was exactly what victory required. December 19th, 1944, evening. Joachim Peiper stands in the frozen street of Gleize, a Belgian village of maybe 70 buildings, clinging to a hillside, and confronts a reality that his operational training never prepared him for success, leading directly to destruction. Behind him, stretched along 20 miles of narrow Belgian roads, are the remains of Kampfgruppe Peiper, 70 operational tanks, 140 vehicles, and approximately 800 men out of the 5,000 who began the advance 3 days ago. Ahead, 8 miles distant across forested hills, lies Dinant on the Meuse River, the objective, the breakthrough point that would turn this offensive from desperate gamble into genuine strategic success. 8 miles. In ideal conditions, 20 minutes by tank. But conditions aren't ideal. Peiper has no fuel, literally. The supply trucks that were supposed to follow his advance never arrived, destroyed or captured by American forces that retook Stavelot and cut his supply line. He has no infantry support. The foot soldiers who should be clearing resistance and protecting his flanks are still fighting 10 miles behind him. He has no air cover. The Luftwaffe is nowhere, while American planes are beginning to appear now that weather is clearing. And, most critically, American forces are converging on Gleize from 3 directions, closing the trap that Peiper walked into by advancing too far, too fast, ahead of support. He's achieved the deepest penetration of any German unit in the offensive. His reward is encirclement and slow annihilation. The trap springs methodically. December 20th, American forces retake Stavelot. The town Peiper punched through on December 17th. The bridge over the Amberlev River, damaged but passable when Peiper crossed it, is now destroyed completely. Engineers blow it so thoroughly that rebuilding would take weeks. Peiper's route back to German lines no longer exists. December 21st, the 82nd Airborne Division establishes blocking positions north and west of Gleize, cutting potential escape routes. December 22nd, elements of the 3rd Armoured Division positions south and east, completing the encirclement. Peiper requests fuel drops by air. The Luftwaffe promises delivery but never arrives. He requests breakout support from other German units. Support is promised but never materializes. The German 5th Panzer Army, which should be reinforcing its most successful spearhead, is still fighting for street, Vith, and has nothing to spare. Peiper realizes, with the clarity that comes from desperation, that he's alone. 800 men, 70 tanks that can't move for lack of fuel, surrounded by Americans whose numbers grow hourly. The tactical situation has no solution. The question is no longer whether Kampfgruppe Peiper will be destroyed, but whether any of its personnel will survive. The American response to Peiper's encirclement is methodical and overwhelming. Rather than immediately assaulting Gleize and suffering heavy casualties, attacking entrenched German armour, American commanders decide to destroy the pocket systematically. Artillery is positioned on surrounding hills, 105mm and 155mm howitzers, enough firepower to flatten the village if required. The fire mission begins on December 22nd and continues without pause for 48 hours. Every 3 to 4 minutes, shells fall on Gleize. Not random harassment fire, but carefully planned destruction aimed at specific targets. Buildings where German troops shelter, stone walls that provide cover, the cellars where wounded are taken. The artillery crews work in shifts, maintaining continuous fire, methodically reducing the village to rubble. German soldiers describe the experience as psychological torture, the constant anticipation of the next impact, the inability to predict where shells will land, the certainty that eventually, statistically, one will land on you. Men go mad. Soldiers refuse to leave cellars, even when buildings collapse above them. The wounded, packed into improvised aid stations, die from shock and blood loss because treatment is impossible under continuous bombardment. December 23rd brings clear weather and American air power, and what follows is execution by aircraft. P-47 fighter bombers appear over Gleize in waves of 4, dive-bombing German positions, rocketing vehicles that lack fuel to move. The German tanks, which 3 days ago were unstoppable weapons advancing through shocked American positions, have become stationary targets. The pilots describe it as almost unsporting tanks sitting motionless, perfect targets, unable to evade or hide. 500-pound bombs drop on King Tigers, blowing turrets off chassis, turning 70-ton tanks into scrap metal. Rockets pierce Panther hulls, igniting ammunition that cooks off in spectacular explosions. Half-tracks and trucks, abandoned on Gleize's streets, burn one by one as aircraft methodically destroy every vehicle they can identify. Peiper watches from a cellar window as his command is annihilated from above. Each destroyed vehicle is irreplaceable. Each represents combat power Germany cannot regenerate. By evening on December 23rd, Kampfgruppe Peiper has lost 50 vehicles to air attack, nearly half its remaining strength eliminated in 10 hours by an enemy it cannot fight. Inside Gleize's cellars, the conditions defy human tolerance. 800 German soldiers and approximately 150 German wounded share space in medieval stone cellars, never designed for occupancy. No heat except body warmth. No light except candles and flashlights with dying batteries. The smell is overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, infected wounds, human waste. Medical supplies ran out. On December 22nd, a German doctor performs amputations without anesthesia, using a saw borrowed from a carpenter's workshop, working by candlelight, while American artillery shakes dust from the ceiling above him. The wounded, who might survive with proper treatment, die from shock or infection. The wounded who cannot survive die slowly, crying for morphine nobody has, cared for by medics who can do nothing except provide presents. Food is gone. Soldiers eat snow for hydration. Nobody has slept more than an hour in 3 days. Combat stress casualties are common men who stop responding to orders, who stare at walls, who cry uncontrollably. Discipline, the rigid structure that holds military units together, is fraying under pressure that exceeds human endurance. December 24th, Christmas Eve. Peiper assembles his officers in a cellar that serves as command post. The tactical brief is brutally simple. Ammunition for the tanks, nearly exhausted. 0. Food, none. Medical supplies, none. American forces surrounding the village in strength. Artillery fire continuous. Air attacks constant. Relief forces not coming. The Kampfgruppe's combat effectiveness? Effectively zero. Peiper presents two options. Option 1. Surrender en masse. Hope the Americans respect the Geneva Convention. Spend the rest of the war as prisoners. Option 2. Abandon all vehicles and heavy weapons. Attempt breakout on foot through forests. Try to reach German lines 40 miles east. Option 1 means survival, but captivity. Option 2 means possible escape but probable death in forests in winter while hunted by American patrols. The officers vote. The choice is unanimous: breakout on foot. These are SS soldiers, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front, where surrender to Soviet forces meant execution or a slow death in prison camps. They choose risk over certainty, action over passivity. Peiper begins planning an operation that has perhaps a 10% chance of success. But 10% is better than zero. The decision about American prisoners illuminates the moral complexity and hypocrisy of warfare. Peiper holds 28 American POWs, captured during the advance, held in Gleize's cellars. Under Geneva Convention, prisoners must be protected. Under military necessity, prisoners slow escape and require resources. Under the precedent set at Malmedy, where Peiper's troops executed American prisoners, reciprocal execution would be justified by many standards. Peiper makes a decision that surprises his officers. The Americans stay behind, alive, under care of a German medic who volunteers to be captured with them. Peiper writes a note explaining that these prisoners were treated properly, asking that his wounded receive similar treatment. It's a gesture that makes no sense given Malmedy, unless Peiper is attempting to balance some moral equation, or create evidence for eventual war crimes trials, or simply acting on exhausted humanity. The psychology is unknowable. The result is that 28 Americans, who expected execution, survived the war. Whether this absolves Peiper of Malmedy's 84 executions is a question that tribunals will later spend months debating. Right now, in this moment, it's simply an unexpectedly decent action in a battle where decency has been rare. December 24th, 2 a.m. 800 German soldiers slip out of Gleize in silence and darkness. They move single file through forests, navigation by compass, carrying wounded on improvised stretchers, abandoning everything that makes noise, boots wrapped in cloth, equipment secured to prevent rattling, no talking, no smoking, no lights. Behind them, Gleize is filled with vehicles they'll never recover. 135 tanks, half-tracks, and trucks, including all 11 King Tigers that led the advance. It's the largest single loss of German armour in the Ardennes, billions of Reichsmarks worth of equipment, irreplaceable vehicles, abandoned because there's no fuel to drive them and no way to tow them. American forces, expecting a night attack or surrender, don't realise for several hours that the Germans are gone. By the time patrols enter Gleize on December 25th, Peiper's column is 15 miles away, ghosting through forests, moving toward German lines. Of 800 who attempt the escape, approximately 650 reach German lines over the next 72 hours. 150 die in forests, shot by American patrols, frozen to death, or simply lost and never found. Kampfgruppe Peiper, the elite spearhead of Germany's last offensive, has suffered 84% casualties and achieved nothing except the deepest penetration that ultimately proved irrelevant. The strategic assessment is devastating for German planning. Peiper's Kampfgruppe represented the best Germany had experienced: officers, elite troops, modern tanks, clear objectives. They achieved tactical surprise, broke through American lines, advanced 70 miles in 72 hours, got within 8 miles of their objective. Everything worked exactly as planned for 3 days. Then logistics, American resilience, and the inescapable mathematics of material inferiority destroyed them. The lesson is clear. Tactical excellence cannot overcome strategic disadvantage. You cannot advance faster than your supply lines can follow. You cannot survive without fuel. You cannot operate under clear skies without air superiority. Hitler's plan required that all of these impossibilities somehow work out, that captured fuel would materialize, that American resistance would collapse, that weather would stay bad forever. Peiper's destruction proves that none of that was realistic. By December 26th, when Peiper's survivors reach German lines and report Kampfgruppe Peiper's destruction, German intelligence can calculate the offensive's outcome. The deepest penetration failed. If elite troops with modern equipment couldn't reach the Meuse, Nobody could. The offensive hasn't been stopped by American counterattacks. It's been stopped by its own logistical impossibility, revealed through Peiper's advance and encirclement. The spearhead is dead, and with it, any realistic hope that Hitler's gamble might succeed. December 19th, 1944. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery arrives at headquarters of the U.S. First Army and immediately recognizes what American commanders are, only beginning to understand the German offensive isn't a local attack to be contained, it's a breakthrough that threatens to split the Allied front. Montgomery has spent 5 years fighting the Wehrmacht from North Africa through Sicily and Normandy, and he knows how German offensives develop. The pattern is familiar. Initial breakthrough, rapid exploitation by armor, collapse of enemy cohesion, strategic gains before defenders can react. The Ardennes offensive follows this pattern perfectly. And if it continues unchecked, German armor will reach the Meuse River within days. If they cross the Meuse, the road to Antwerp is open, and Montgomery's 21st Army Group, the entire British force in Belgium, plus attached American units, will be cut off from supplies and facing potential encirclement. Eisenhower has transferred command of all American forces north of the German penetration to Montgomery, a decision that will create political controversy, but that makes military sense. Montgomery is closer to the northern sector, his communications work, and he has immediate access to British reserves. His first order is simple and non-negotiable: hold the Meuse at all costs. The Meuse River is Belgium's natural defensive barrier, 300 feet wide at most crossing points, with steep banks and limited bridges. In December, swollen by winter rains, it's a serious obstacle that tanks cannot ford and infantry cannot swim. Control the bridges, and you control movement across the river. Lose the bridges, and the entire defensive line collapses. There are 7 major bridges between Givet and Liège, plus several smaller crossings. Montgomery orders British XXX Corps to occupy defensive positions on the west bank of the Meuse and prepare all bridges for demolition. Engineers wire explosives, calculating the charges needed to drop spans into the river. British tanks take hull-down positions overlooking likely approach routes. Infantry dig in along the riverbank. By December 20th, the Meuse has become the Allies' last stand line. If German armour breaks through here, there's nothing between them and Antwerp except open country and scattered supply depots. Everything depends on whether American forces east of the Meuse can delay the Germans long enough for this defensive line to solidify. December 20th, Dinant. The bridge here is perhaps the most critical crossing point because it's positioned perfectly for the German Vith Panzer Army's axis of advance. Capture Dinant and German armour can cross the Meuse and drive north to Brussels or northwest to Antwerp. British Armoured Brigade arrives at Dinant just 4 hours before German reconnaissance reaches the opposite bank of the river. 4 hours. The margin between establishing defence and losing the crossing is measured in hours, not days. British tank crews position their Churchill tanks in locations where they can observe the approaches to the bridge. Infantry establish fighting positions in buildings overlooking the riverbank. Artillery registers on the eastern approaches, ready to fire on command. When German reconnaissance vehicles probe toward the river on December 20th, they're met with British tank fire that destroys 2 vehicles and sends the rest scattering. The Germans realise the bridge is defended and pull back to wait for their main armour. The British realise the Germans are coming and request reinforcements. Both sides are racing to concentrate forces. The question is, which side can mass combat power faster? December 22nd through 24th, the German 2nd Panzer Division reaches Celles, approximately 4 miles east of Dinant. This is the closest any German unit comes to crossing the Meuse. 4 miles. In ideal conditions, 10 minutes by tank. The division commander can see the church steeples of Dinant through his binoculars. His orders are to advance, seize the bridge, and cross. His reality is that he's run out of fuel. The division's tanks are scattered across several miles, immobilised, unable to advance or retreat. The infantry that should be supporting them is miles behind, still fighting through American defensive positions. Supply trucks that should be delivering fuel have been destroyed by American air attacks or ambushed by American forces that cut in behind German spearheads. The division commander requests fuel drops by air. The Luftwaffe promises delivery but can't execute because Allied fighters control the skies. He requests fuel delivery by ground convoy. Supply units report the roads are cut, convoys can't get through. By December 24th, 2nd Panzer Division sits motionless 4 miles from its objective, watching Allied forces concentrate against them, unable to advance, forbidden to retreat. They've driven farther than anyone else. Their reward is destruction. December 25th, Christmas Day. Allied forces launch a coordinated attack to destroy the pocket at Celis. American 2nd Armoured Division attacks from the east and south. British 29th Armoured Brigade attacks from the west. Artillery from both nations pounds the immobilised German positions. Aircraft attack in waves, P-47s, Hawker Typhoons, medium bombers dropping everything they have on targets that can't move. The German 2nd Panzer Division, lacking fuel to manoeuvre, lacking air support, lacking infantry, fights from static positions, and is systematically annihilated. By December 26th, the division has lost 81 tanks, 93 other armoured vehicles, and 405 trucks. More than 1,500 German soldiers are dead or captured. The division, which began the offensive as one of Germany's premier armoured formations, ceases to exist as a combat-effective unit. The destruction is so complete that Allied intelligence initially doubts their own casualty counts, thinking they must be overestimating. They're not. The Battle of Celis is Germany's high water mark in the Ardennes, the farthest penetration of the offensive, the closest they come to crossing the Meuse, and it ends in complete tactical annihilation. The defensive success at the Meuse River reveals several critical factors that determine the battle's outcome. First, Allied mobility and logistics. American and British units can move reinforcements faster than German units can exploit breakthroughs. When the crisis at Dinant develops, British armour covers 70 miles in 12 hours. German armour, constrained by fuel shortages and constant air attack, struggles to advance 5 miles per day. Second, communications. Allied forces maintain functional communications throughout the battle radio networks. Telephone lines, courier systems all work reasonably well. German communications are spotty at best, with units often ignorant of what's happening to their flanks or rear. Third, intelligence. Allied commanders have a reasonable picture of German dispositions and intentions, updated regularly. German commanders operate partially blind, unaware of Allied reinforcement rates or defensive strength. Fourth, air power. Once weather clears, Allied aircraft destroy German supply lines, attack German concentrations, and make daylight movement suicidal. German air power is essentially absent. These advantages, individually, are significant. Cumulatively, they're decisive. The psychological impact on German forces reaching the Meuse and being unable to cross is profound and demoralising. These troops have fought for 10 days, advanced 60 miles, overcome American defensive positions, survived constant combat, and genuinely believed they might be winning. Reaching the Meuse feels like vindication. They've done what skeptics said was impossible, driven from the German border to Belgium's major river barrier. Then they discover the bridges are defended, they have no fuel to attack, no air support, no supplies, and Allied forces are converging from 3 directions. The realization that the offensive has failed, that all the sacrifice and suffering achieved nothing, destroys morale more effectively than any American attack. German soldiers begin surrendering in large numbers, something that was rare in the early days of the offensive. Officers report widespread battle fatigue, the military euphemism for soldiers who psychologically cannot continue fighting. Units that were combat effective on December 20th are hollowed out shells by December 25th. Not primarily from casualties, but from cumulative exhaustion and the psychological collapse that comes from recognizing defeat. December 26th. Montgomery conducts a staff briefing, assessing the situation north of the Bulge. His conclusion is characteristically blunt. The German offensive has failed. They cannot cross the Meuse. They cannot sustain their current positions. They must withdraw or be destroyed. The assessment proves accurate. German forces west of Street. Vith are already pulling back, attempting to shorten their lines before American counterattacks encircle them. The 6th Panzer Army, which was supposed to be the main effort driving to Antwerp, has stalled completely, blocked by American defences and unable to achieve any penetration deeper than 20 miles. The 5th Panzer Army, which achieved the deepest advances, is now fighting defensive battles against overwhelming Allied forces. The 7th Army, protecting the southern shoulder, is being pushed back by Patton's 3rd Army. Every metric of offensive success, territorial gains, enemy forces destroyed, objectives captured, shows German achievement falling far short of requirements. Most critically, the Meuse River remains an uncrossed barrier. Not a single German soldier crossed the Meuse during the entire offensive. The line held. The final accounting of the Meuse defensive operation reveals just how close the battle actually was, despite the eventual clear Allied victory. If German forces had reached the Meuse 2 days earlier, before British reinforcements arrived, they might have captured a bridge. If fuel supplies had been adequate, German armour could have pushed across before defences solidified. If weather had remained bad 3 more days, delaying Allied air operations, German supply lines might have survived long enough to sustain the advance. The margins are narrow. But in military operations, narrow margins determine outcomes. The race to the Meuse was won by hours at several points, British armour arriving hours before German reconnaissance, engineers wiring bridges hours before German attacks, air operations beginning hours after weather cleared. Each small advantage accumulated into decisive success. The Germans needed everything to work perfectly. The Allies needed only to avoid catastrophic failure. The Meuse defensive line, established in chaos and held against serious assault, represents the moment where Germany's offensive possibilities ended and Allied counteroffensive began. After December 26th, the question is no longer whether Germany can break through, but whether German forces can escape the Bulge before Allied pincers close and trap them. The strategic initiative has shifted permanently. The line held, and holding was enough. December 17th, 1944, noon. 3 American combat engineers stand at Trois Ponts, Belgium, looking at a bridge that carries the weight of Germany's entire offensive plan. Behind them, distant but approaching, are the sounds of armour, the distinctive rumble of tank engines, the squeaking of treads on pavement. Ahead, wired into the bridge structure, are demolition charges, carefully placed to drop the span into the Amblève River. The engineers are Corporal Fred Chapin, Private Bernard Goldstein, and Sergeant Gene Miller. They've been working for 6 hours preparing this bridge for demolition, and now they're watching the road from Stavelot waiting for American vehicles to clear, trying to determine the exact moment when they blow the charges. Too early, and they trap American units on the wrong side. Too late, and German tanks cross. The decision is theirs alone, their radio is dead, their commanding officer is missing, and the nearest friendly unit is miles away. As they watch, German vehicles appear on the eastern approach. Not scouts, not light vehicles, King Tigers. The lead tank is perhaps 200 yards away, when Chapin twists the detonator handle. The explosion is enormous, flinging debris hundreds of feet, severing the bridge's main spans, dropping tons of steel and concrete into the river. When the smoke clears, the bridge is gone. The German tanks sit on the opposite bank, turrets rotating, searching for targets. The 3 engineers are already running. The destruction of Trois Ponts Bridge is typical of hundreds of small unit actions that collectively determine the Battle of the Bulge's outcome. American engineers blow more than 100 bridges in the first 3 days of the German offensive. Every destroyed bridge forces German columns to detour, sometimes by dozens of miles, adding hours or days to their advance. The delays accumulate arithmetically. A 2-hour detour here, a 4-hour delay there, a destroyed bridge forcing an overnight halt to find alternative routes. By December 20th, the cumulative delays have pushed German spearheads 24 to 36 hours behind schedule, and that slippage is fatal to Hitler's plan. The plan requires speed, 20 miles per day, every day, no pauses. Reality delivers 5 to 8 miles per day, with constant interruptions. The difference between plan and reality is measured in destroyed bridges, defended crossroads, ambushed convoys, and 1,000 small actions where American soldiers made the decision to fight rather than flee. December 18th, Buchenbach. A single American artillery forward observer, 2nd Lieutenant Eric Wood, sits in a church steeple with a radio, binoculars, and a map. Below him, German armour is advancing toward American defensive positions, a full panzer division, at least 50 tanks, supported by infantry and artillery. Wood's job is to observe enemy movements and call artillery fire, directing the guns positioned miles behind him onto targets he can see. The problem is that calling artillery fire reveals his position, and revealed positions attract enemy fire. Wood makes the calculation that every forward observer eventually makes. He can save himself by staying silent, or he can save his unit by doing his job and probably dying. He calls the first fire mission at 8 AM. For the next 8 hours, he directs artillery onto German columns, adjusting fire by radio, calmly reporting targets while German shells impact around the church. His fire missions destroy at least 12 German tanks and break up 3 infantry assaults. At 4 p.m., German artillery scores a direct hit on the church steeple. The radio goes dead. Wood's body is found 3 days later, still at his observation post. His actions bought the 26th Infantry Regiment 8 hours to establish defensive positions that will hold for 3 days. 1 man, 8 hours. The cumulative impact of hundreds of such actions determines the battle. Nouville, December 19th through 20th. Team de Sobry, a combined task force of Sherman tanks and armoured infantry, total strength, maybe 400 men, occupies this crossroads village that controls the northern approach to Bastogne. German forces need Nouville to advance on Bastogne. De Sobry's orders are to hold at all costs. The German attack begins at dawn on December 19th, with artillery, then Armour 20 tanks, followed by infantry. De Sobry's Shermans ambush the German armour at close range, destroying 8 tanks before being forced to withdraw. The Germans regroup and attack again. This pattern repeats throughout. December 19th, German assault, American defence, German withdrawal, both sides taking casualties. By nightfall, Nouville is surrounded. December 20th, German attacks intensify. 50 German tanks assault from 3 directions simultaneously. American tank destroyers and artillery break the attack but run out of ammunition. De Sobry requests permission to withdraw. Permission is denied, hold Nouville. The battle continues through December 20th until American units are down to 3 operational tanks and perhaps 100 effectives. Only then does approval for withdrawal come. Team de Sobry fights its way out of Nouville on the evening of December 20th, losing half its remaining strength in the escape. They've held a critical road junction for 36 hours against overwhelming odds. Those 36 hours allow other American units to establish the defensive perimeter around Bastogne. Team de Sobry ceases to exist as a functional unit, but Bastogne holds Parker's Crossroads, December 19th. This isn't even a named location on military maps, it's just an intersection of 2 roads south of Bastogne where Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Parker has positioned elements of the 640th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Parker has 20 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, thinly armoured but fast, with 76mm guns that can penetrate German armour at reasonable range. He's been ordered to delay enemy advance toward Bastogne. That's not a tactical order, it's a suicide mission phrased euphemistically. Parker positions his tank destroyers in concealed positions overlooking the crossroads and waits. The German column that approaches is massive, 40 tanks, perhaps 100 other vehicles, an entire battle group moving south toward Bastogne. Parker lets the column enter the killing zone, then opens fire from 3 sides simultaneously. The ambush is devastating. In 15 minutes, 30 German vehicles are burning, the column is in chaos, and Parker's tank destroyers are withdrawing before German forces can organise a response. The German column, delayed and disorganised, takes 6 hours to reorganise and continue advancing. 6 hours. Parker's command suffers 20% casualties but accomplishes its mission. The German battle group reaches Bastogne 6 hours later than planned, and those 6 hours allow 1 more American infantry regiment to reach Bastogne and join the defence. The anonymous actions are perhaps more important than the named ones because they reveal the pattern that determines the battle. December 20, an unnamed road junction. 5 American tank destroyers from the 740th Tank Destroyer Battalion establish an ambush position where intelligence reports suggest German armour might approach. The intelligence is correct. A German column of 20 tanks advances on the road at noon. The Americans open fire from concealed positions, destroy 12 German tanks, then withdraw before German infantry can counterattack. The action isn't recorded in detail because the American unit is subsequently overrun in a different battle and nobody survives to file a complete report. What's known comes from German after-action reports complaining about unexpected resistance at unidentified location. Multiply this action by 100 or more small American units, ambushing German columns, inflicting disproportionate casualties, withdrawing before being destroyed, and you understand why German advances slow from the double-digit miles per day that Hitler's plan required to the single-digit reality that doomed the offensive. The psychological impact on German forces of constant American resistance is cumulative and destructive. German planning assumed that American units, surprised and overwhelmed, would collapse or retreat in panic. The Eastern Front experience suggested this. Soviet units, when surprised and outflanked, often disintegrated. But American units don't disintegrate. They withdraw when necessary, but fighting. They defend positions until overrun. Then survivors form new defensive positions. Every village requires combat to capture. Every crossroads costs time and casualties. German after-action reports from late December show frustration and exhaustion. One regimental commander writes, "Enemy resistance exceeds all expectations. Every position must be fought for. Advance is possible only with constant combat and heavy casualties. American units fight even when surrounded and cut off." This isn't a complaint about a specific unit, it's a description of overall American behaviour that's destroying German operational timelines. The Wehrmacht has experience fighting enemies who fight skillfully, the British at El Alamein, the Soviets at Kursk, but they don't have experience fighting an enemy with unlimited reserves, overwhelming logistics, and a willingness to trade casualties for time at every level of combat. Tank destroyer effectiveness reveals another dimension of small unit impact. The M18 Hellcat and M36 Jackson tank destroyers are designed for exactly this kind of fluid defensive battle. They're fast 50 miles per hour for the Hellcat, fastest armoured vehicle in the US Infantry. They're mobile tracks designed for cross-country movement. They have powerful guns, 76mm on the Hellcat, 90mm on the Jackson, capable of killing any German tank at combat ranges. But they have minimal armour, thin steel that can't withstand direct hits. The tactical doctrine is to ambush, fire, and withdraw before enemy forces can respond. American tank destroyer battalions kill more than 400 German tanks during the Battle of the Bulge, an average of approximately 2 German tanks destroyed for every American tank destroyer lost. The Germans never develop an effective counter to these tactics, because countering them requires infantry support, air reconnaissance, and coordinated operations, all capabilities that German logistics and communications can't sustain under Allied air attack and artillery fire. The result is that every German advance runs into tank destroyer ambushes, every successful ambush requires time to reorganise, and time is the resource Germany doesn't have. Artillery impact is difficult to quantify, but central to American defensive success. The U.S. Army in Europe has organised artillery into a flexible, responsive system, where multiple artillery battalions can rapidly concentrate fire on single targets. Forward observers call fire missions. Artillery direction centres calculate firing solutions. Multiple batteries fire simultaneously, creating concentrations of shell fire that devastate German formations. During the Battle of the Bulge, American artillery fires more than 1 million shells, significantly more than German artillery despite Germany's offensive posture. The impact is measured in broken German attacks, destroyed vehicle concentrations, and disrupted German movements. German soldiers describe American artillery as their most feared weapon, more feared than tanks, more feared than aircraft, because it's inescapable and constant. You can hide from tanks in forests, you can wait out aircraft in buildings. But artillery finds you anywhere. And when American artillery targets a position, survival is random luck. The psychological toll is enormous. German units that maintain cohesion under small arms fire dissolve under artillery bombardment. The artillery is directed by forward observers like Lieutenant Wood at Butgenbach, individual soldiers whose skill and courage multiply the effectiveness of guns firing miles away. By December 22nd, the accumulated effect of hundreds of small unit actions has created a reality that no German operational plan anticipated. German forces have advanced 60 miles but have suffered casualties far exceeding projections. Every mile has been contested, every village has cost time and lives. The supply lines that should be delivering fuel and ammunition are cut by American raids or interdicted by American artillery. The timetable that required reaching the Meuse River by December 22nd shows German spearheads still 30 miles from the Meuse, exhausted, low on fuel, fighting constantly against American units that appear from nowhere and disappear before German forces can destroy them. The offensive hasn't been stopped by a single decisive battle or by brilliant generalship. It's been stopped by the cumulative mathematics of 1,000 small battles, where American soldiers made the decision to fight when they might have retreated, to hold when they might have surrendered, to ambush when they might have hidden. The bridges blown by engineers, the tank columns ambushed by tank destroyers, the artillery fire called by forward observers, the crossroads held by infantry companies. The delays, each small, accumulating into strategic failure. This is the real story of the Battle of the Bulge, not the dramatic headline battles like Bastogne, but the forgotten actions at unnamed crossroads, where soldiers whose names appear in no histories determined the war's outcome through courage, skill, and a willingness to fight, even when victory seemed impossible. December 17th, 1944. The massive American fuel depot at Stavelot sits in a valley just west of the town. 2 million gallons of gasoline stored in 5-gallon jerry cans and 55-gallon drums stacked in neat rows under camouflage netting. It's one of dozens of such depots scattered across Belgium, part of the logistics network that keeps the Allied armies supplied. At 6 a.m., American quartermaster personnel receive warning that German armour has broken through at Losheim Gap and might be approaching. The evacuation order is immediate: save what you can, destroy the rest. Trucks begin loading fuel containers while engineers prepare demolition charges. By noon, approximately 300,000 gallons have been evacuated eastward. The remaining 1,700,000 gallons are doused with gasoline and set ablaze. At 1:30 p.m, Kampfgruppe Peiper's lead tanks crest the hill overlooking Stavelot and see smoke, a black column rising thousands of feet, visible for 20 miles. Peiper arrives at the depot 15 minutes later to find an inferno, so intense that metal drums are melting, fuel vaporizing the heat, making it impossible to approach within 100 yards. His tanks are running on fumes. His half-tracks need refueling. His entire advance depends on captured fuel. And he's watching 2 million gallons of salvation burn. One SS officer later writes in his diary, "We stood watching our hopes go up in smoke, knowing this meant our death sentence." The fuel crisis was baked into Hitler's operational plan from the beginning, and every German officer involved understood it. Germany's Quartermaster Corps calculated that the Ardennes offensive required 9 million gallons of fuel gasoline for tanks and vehicles, diesel for trucks, aviation fuel for Luftwaffe support. Wehrmacht Logistics could provide 4.5 million gallons, stripped from every other sector of the front, accumulated over months, transported to forward depots at enormous effort. The remaining 4.5 million gallons, exactly half the requirement, was supposed to come from captured American depots. This wasn't contingency planning, this was the primary plan. German forces were expected to overrun American supply dumps, capture intact fuel stocks, and use American gasoline to continue advancing. It was military planning based on assumption rather than capability, hope rather than logistics. And when American engineers systematically destroyed or evacuated every major fuel depot in the path of the German advance, the entire offensive became mathematically impossible. You cannot advance without fuel. You cannot capture fuel depots that don't exist. The equation has no solution. December 19th. A German supply convoy attempts to reach the 5th Panzer Army through the town of Hufeleis. The convoy consists of 40 trucks carrying fuel, ammunition, and rations, essential supplies for forward units that are running dangerously low. The route takes them through forests where American forces have been bypassed but not eliminated. At 2 p.m, American artillery opens fire on the convoy. The first shells hit the lead trucks, which are carrying fuel. The explosions are catastrophic, trucks erupting in fireballs, fuel spraying across the road, secondary explosions as ammunition catches fire. Within 5 minutes, the entire convoy is destroyed, 40 trucks burning, their cargo lost, and with it a full day's supply allocation for an entire Panzer Corps. German records show this pattern repeating throughout the offensive supply convoys: ambushed, destroyed, or simply unable to reach forward units because American forces control the roads. By December 21st, German quartermasters calculate they're losing 30% of supplies in transit, either to American attacks or to vehicles breaking down and being abandoned for lack of recovery capability. The offensive is starving itself through logistics failures that no amount of tactical success can overcome. December 21st. The operations log of German 2nd Panzer. Division records a stark entry. Fuel sufficient for 8 kilometers. Attack operations impossible. Request immediate resupply. 8 kilometers, roughly 5 miles. The division is approaching Dinant, within striking distance of the Meuse River bridges that are their strategic objective. But they cannot advance 5 more miles because they lack fuel. The division commander requests emergency airlift of fuel supplies. The Luftwaffe acknowledges the request but cannot execute. Allied fighters control the airspace, and transport aircraft attempting daylight flights are shot down before reaching their destinations. The division commander requests emergency ground convoy. Quartermaster Corps reports that all available fuel trucks are already committed and that supply roads are cut by American counterattacks. The division sits immobilized for 36 hours, close enough to see their objective, unable to reach it, while American and British forces concentrate against them. When fuel finally arrives on December 23rd, delivered by horse-drawn wagons, because motorized transport can't get through, it's enough for 15 kilometers of movement. By then, Allied forces have established defensive positions that make further advance suicidal. The 2nd Panzer Division has travelled 60 miles in 6 days. The final 5 miles prove impossible. The fuel consumption rates reveal why Germany's logistical plan was fantasy. A Panther tank, Germany's main battle tank in the Ardennes, consumes approximately 2 gallons of fuel per mile under combat conditions, more if the terrain is difficult, if the tank is accelerating frequently, or if the crew is using power-hungry systems like turret rotation and gun stabilization. A King Tiger, the heaviest tank in the offensive, consumes more than 3 gallons per mile. Do the mathematics. Kampfgruppe Peiper's 117 tanks, travelling 70 miles from the German border to La Gleize, consumed roughly 15,000 to 20,000 gallons of fuel. That's for movement alone, not counting idling engines during combat, repositioning during battles, or defensive maneuvers. Peiper started with approximately 60,000 gallons, his entire fuel allocation. He expected to capture at least 50,000 gallons from American depots along his route. He captured fewer than 5,000 usable gallons, most of it in small quantities from abandoned American vehicles. By December 19th, 3 days into the offensive, his Kampfgruppe was immobilized by fuel shortage. The plan assumed capture rates that were purely fictional. Reality delivered fuel starvation. The American fuel denial program was systematic and ruthlessly effective. 1st Army Quartermaster Corps issued orders on December 16th, the first day of the offensive, that all fuel depots within 20 miles of the front were to be evacuated or destroyed immediately. No exceptions, no delays, no attempts to hold depots against German advance. Fuel is too important and too vulnerable. Save it or burn it, but don't let the Germans have it. Across the Ardennes, American quartermaster units executed these orders with remarkable discipline. More than 8 million gallons of fuel were evacuated from forward depots in the first 48 hours of the German offensive, moved west by truck convoy, often under fire, sometimes with German armour in sight. Depots that couldn't be evacuated were destroyed. Engineers didn't just set fire to fuel, they used demolition charges to rupture containers, ensuring fuel soaked into ground where it couldn't be recovered, then ignited the residue. The Germans overran dozens of fuel depot locations. They found burned earth, melted drums, and craters. They captured fewer than 100,000 gallons of usable American fuel during the entire offensive, less than 2% of what they needed and expected. The systematic denial turned Hitler's capture fuel strategy from optimistic to delusional. December 23rd. German quartermasters compile a crisis assessment for high command. The fuel situation is catastrophic and worsening. Current stocks, approximately 1,200,000 gallons remaining across all 3 armies in the Ardennes. Daily consumption at current operational tempo, approximately 800,000 gallons. Days of operations remaining at current consumption, 1.5 days. Projected fuel deliveries over next 7 days, 400,000 gallons if supply convoys can get through Allied air interdiction. The mathematics are brutal and inarguable. German forces in the Ardennes will be completely immobilized by fuel starvation within 48 hours unless they immediately reduce operations or achieve impossible resupply rates. The operational choices are equally stark. Continue offensive operations and accept complete immobilization by December 25th, or begin withdrawing now to shorten supply lines. Neither option offers success. The first guarantees encirclement and destruction. The second abandons all offensive objectives and ensures the operation was pointless. Hitler, when presented with these options, refuses to accept either. He orders continued offensive operations and promises that fuel supplies will improve. They won't. They can't. The offensive is already dead from logistics failure. The troops fighting it just don't know yet. The comparative logistics reveal the asymmetric reality of the Battle of the Bulge. American supply operations deliver approximately 100,000 tons of supplies daily to forces in the European theatre, food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, everything armies need to function. This supply network runs on thousands of trucks, travelling established roads, supported by railroads, protected by air cover, managed by sophisticated logistics staffs using mechanical calculators and coordination procedures developed over 3 years of warfare. When German attack creates chaos in the Ardennes, American logistics adapt within 72 hours, routes change, priorities shift, supplies flow to new locations. By December 20th, American units are receiving supply deliveries more reliably than before the offensive because logistics personnel have concentrated all efforts on the critical sector. German supply operations, by contrast, rely heavily on horse-drawn wagons because fuel shortages make motorized transport impossible for rear echelon logistics. Approximately 50% of German supplies in the Ardennes are moved by horse cart, travelling at walking speed, vulnerable to weather, requiring fodder for horses that itself requires logistics. When American aircraft destroy bridges and interdict roads, German supply flow doesn't adapt, it simply stops. The material disparity is so extreme that American logistics problems are about efficiency, while German logistics problems are about survival. By December 26, aerial reconnaissance photographs tell the story more clearly than any report. German vehicles abandoned on roads throughout the Ardennes, tanks, trucks, half-tracks, hundreds of vehicles sitting motionless, not because they're destroyed, but because they're out of fuel. Crews have drained every drop from tanks, tried mixing gasoline with diesel in desperate attempts to move a few more miles, finally abandoned vehicles and continued on foot. American intelligence officers examining these photographs initially suspect a trick. Surely the Germans wouldn't abandon operational vehicles, but captured German soldiers confirmed the reality. They ran out of fuel. Vehicles that could still fight were left behind because they couldn't move. One German panzer officer, interrogated after capture, describes the experience. "We could see American positions. Our guns could range them. We had ammunition. But we couldn't advance because we had no fuel. And we couldn't retreat for the same reason. We just sat there waiting to be destroyed. That's not combat. That's execution." The fuel famine transformed Germany's offensive from military operation to slow-motion disaster, where outcome was determined not by combat but by arithmetic. The statistical accounting is damning. Germany began the offensive with 4.5 million gallons of fuel. They expected to capture 4.5 million more from American depots. They captured fewer than 100,000 usable gallons. Total fuel available, 4,600,000 gallons. Total fuel required to reach Antwerp per Hitler's plan, 9 million gallons. 4,400,000 gallons more than the total amount they actually had. By December 26, German forces had consumed approximately 3,800,000 gallons, leaving 800,000 gallons remaining. But at this point in the offensive, German armour is 60 miles from German supply, depots, and 30 miles from the Meuse River. Moving those forces back to German lines requires approximately 700,000 gallons. Continuing the advance requires more than 1 million gallons that don't exist. The Germans are trapped by their own logistics in positions they cannot hold and cannot effectively abandon. They immobilise themselves 60% of vehicles through fuel starvation, not destroyed by combat, simply unable to move. The offensive died of fuel famine before Allied counterattacks even began in force. Hitler's plan required capturing enemy supplies to succeed. Instead, the enemy destroyed their supplies and forced Germany to starve. The mathematics of fuel determined the battle's outcome more decisively than any combat action. You cannot fight when you cannot move. You cannot win when your plan requires resources that don't exist. December 19th, 1944, Verdun, France. The meeting room is cold, the building barely heated, windows showing freezing rain that's been falling for days. General Dwight Eisenhower has summoned his senior commanders for emergency conference to address the German breakthrough. The mood is tense, almost panicked. Nobody expected this, nobody planned for this, and the situation reports from the Ardennes are increasingly alarming. Eisenhower opens the meeting by saying, "The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster." Several officers look skeptical. Opportunity? American forces are being pushed back. Units are surrounded. The front line has collapsed across 80 miles. Then Patton speaks. George S. Patton Jr., commander of 3rd Army, asks, "When do you want me to attack?" The question hangs in the air because everyone knows what it means. Patton's 3rd Army is currently attacking eastward, pushing toward the Saar region of Germany. Stopping that attack Pivoting 90 degrees north and attacking into the Bulge requires moving an entire army, hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, complete logistics networks. Eisenhower asks when Patton can be ready. Patton replies, December 22nd, 3 days. Other generals laugh, thinking he's making a joke. He's not joking. He's already planned for this contingency. The logistical achievement Patton is proposing is genuinely extraordinary. Third Army consists of 3 corps, approximately 250,000 troops, 20,000 vehicles, and complete support infrastructure, artillery, engineers, medical units, supply depots. They're currently deployed along a 100-mile front-facing east. Patton proposes pivoting this entire force 90 degrees and attacking north into the southern flank of the German Bulge, a maneuver that requires redirecting every supply convoy, repositioning every artillery battery, moving entire divisions on roads that are already congested with refugee traffic, and retreating American units. Military doctrine suggests this maneuver should take 7 to 10 days minimum. Patton claims he'll do it in 72 hours. The claim sounds impossible until Patton reveals he's been planning this exact operation for days. When the German offensive began on December 16th, Patton immediately recognized it as both crisis and opportunity crisis for American forces in the Ardennes, opportunity for Third Army to attack the German flank. He'd ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans for a 90-degree pivot while publicly maintaining his eastward offensive. Now, with Eisenhower's authorization, Patton can execute plans that already exist. It's still an immense undertaking, but it's possible because preparation has already happened. December 20 through 21st. Third Army pivots. The operation involves moving 3 divisions, the 4th Armoured Division, 26th Infantry Division, and 80th Infantry Division, 90 miles north from their current positions to attack positions, facing the Bulge. Each division requires approximately 5,000 vehicles. Each vehicle needs fuel, routes, and destinations. The roads are icy, visibility is terrible, and the same roads must carry traffic in both directions, units moving north to attack, supply convoys moving west away from the German advance, civilian refugees fleeing combat zones. Military police establish traffic control points at every major intersection, directing traffic like they're conducting an orchestra. Convoys move bumper to bumper at 20 miles per hour, engines straining, drivers fighting fatigue. Units travel through the night without headlights, navigation by moonlight and compass, trusting that the vehicle ahead knows where it's going. Tanks are moved by rail where possible, but rail capacity is limited and many tanks must drive the entire distance, consuming fuel and wearing out tracks before they ever reach combat. The human experience of this pivot is exhausting and surreal. Soldiers in Third Army units bed down on December 20th, believing they're attacking Germany the next morning. They wake December 21st and receive new orders north to Belgium, new enemy positions, new mission. Nobody explains the larger strategic picture. The troops don't know about Bastogne being surrounded or the crisis in the Ardennes. They know only that plans have changed and they're moving out immediately. They board trucks in darkness, ride north for hours, arrive at assembly areas they've never seen, and are immediately briefed on attack missions against enemy positions they haven't reconnoitred. The experienced veterans understand that sudden mission changes mean something has gone badly wrong somewhere. The newer soldiers are simply confused. But confusion doesn't prevent execution. Third Army's divisions arrive at their attack positions on schedule, having moved 133,000 men and 25,000 vehicles 90 miles in 48 hours. It's a logistical achievement that military historians will cite for decades as an example of operational flexibility and staff competence. December 22nd, 5 a.m. Third Army attacks north. The assault is spearheaded by 4th Armoured Division, one of the US Army's most experienced armour formations, veterans of the breakout from Normandy and the pursuit across France. Their mission is deceptively simple: drive 40 miles north through German defensive positions and relieve Bastogne. The execution is anything but simple. The Germans know American forces are concentrating south of the Bulge and have positioned defensive forces across all major roads. These aren't the elite SS formations that led Germany's offensive. Those units are exhausted and committed in the north. These are Volksgrenadier divisions, Wehrmacht infantry, second-line troops. But they're defending, which negates many American advantages. Every village becomes a strong point. Every hill requires combat to capture. The advance that American planners hoped might achieve 15 to 20 miles per day instead manages 5 to 8 miles through bitter fighting in freezing weather. December 23rd. The battle at Martelange Bridge illustrates the kind of fighting that characterizes Patton's relief operation. Martelange is a small Belgian town straddling the Sûre River. The bridge here is critical for 4th Armoured Division's advance to lose the bridge, and the entire division must detour 20 miles. American armour approaches the bridge at 9 a.m. and finds German engineers have blown it, dropping the centre spans into the river. The division engineers arrive at 10 a.m. and begin constructing a Bailey Bridge, a prefabricated steel structure that can be assembled under combat conditions. While engineers work, German artillery pounds the construction site from hills across the river. German snipers shoot at engineers exposed on the bridge framework. American artillery responds with counter-battery fire, trying to suppress German guns. American infantry crosses the river in assault boats and attacks German positions from the flank. The battle continues throughout the day, engineers working under fire, casualties mounting, the Bailey Bridge gradually extending across the river. At 8 p.m., 10 hours after construction began, the bridge is complete and tanks begin crossing. The 4th Armoured Division has advanced maybe 2 miles this entire day. But they're across the Sûre River, and Bastogne is now 25 miles north instead of 27, December 24 through 25, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. 4th Armoured Division approaches Bastogne, now just 10 miles distant, and the fighting intensifies. German forces recognise that if the relief column reaches Bastogne, the encirclement fails and the entire southern German offensive becomes untenable. They commit reserves to blocking positions, creating defensive lines across every road and trail leading north. The Americans attack with combined arms, tanks supported by infantry, artillery suppressing German positions, engineers clearing minefields, everyone advancing under constant fire. December 24th, 4th Armoured captures Warnack after house-to-house fighting that leaves the village burning. December 25th, they attack Assenois, 4 miles from Bastogne, in an assault that becomes legendary. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, later Army Chief of Staff, tank commander, now leads a column of Sherman tanks directly through German positions at maximum speed, tanks firing on the move, infantry riding on the tank decks, everyone shooting at everything. It's less military operation than controlled charge. German soldiers, shocked by the audacity, break and run. By mid-afternoon on December 25th, Abrams' tanks are through German lines. Bastogne is 3 miles away. December 26th, 4:45 p.m. The lead tanks of 4th Armoured Division, part of Abrams' column, roll into Bastogne's defensive perimeter. The defenders, who've been holding for 6 days, watch with exhausted disbelief as American armour appears from the south. One witness describes the moment. "We heard engines, American engines, thought we might be hallucinating from exhaustion. Then we saw the white star on the lead tank and we knew the siege was over." The meeting between Abrams and the 101st Airborne is anticlimactic. Abrams climbs out of his tank, meets the 1st Airborne officer, and says something like, "Gee, I'm mighty glad to see you." The officer responds, "We're mighty glad to see you. That's it." No dramatic speeches, no ceremony, just exhausted soldiers acknowledging mutual survival. The corridor Abrams opened is narrow, maybe 1,000 yards wide, under fire from German artillery. But it's open. Supplies can reach Bastogne. Wounded can be evacuated. The encirclement is broken. The cost of Patton's relief operation reveals that breaking the siege wasn't a triumphal parade. 3rd Army suffered more than 15,000 casualties between December 22nd and December 26th, 4 days of constant combat, attacking in winter conditions against determined German resistance. 4th Armoured Division, which began the offensive with 200 tanks, finished with fewer than 80 operational losses to German fire, mechanical breakdowns, vehicles bogged in mud or disabled by mines. The infantry divisions attacking alongside armour took similarly heavy casualties. Villages like Bougainville, Martelange and Assenois were destroyed in the fighting, civilian populations huddling in cellars while American and German forces fought over their homes. The relief was militarily successful but tactically brutal. Patton's operational flexibility and 3rd Army's combat effectiveness achieved the objective, but not cheaply and not easily. The romantic narrative of Patton racing to save Bastogne simplifies reality. The actual operation was grinding, bloody combat where every mile cost American lives and where success was never certain until Abrams' tanks finally reached the airborne perimeter. The strategic assessment reveals both achievement and limitations. Patton's relief of Bastogne was a genuine operational success, moving an army, attacking on schedule, accomplishing the mission. It demonstrated that American forces could react faster than German forces could exploit advantages, that Allied logistics and staff work were vastly superior to German equivalents. But relief didn't end the battle or destroy the German force. The corridor into Bastogne remained narrow and contested for days. German forces continued attacking Bastogne's perimeter even after the corridor opened. The siege was broken, but the fighting continued. More critically, Bastogne was always going to hold even without Patton's relief. The 101st Airborne had ammunition and supplies from air drops, and German forces lacked strength to overrun the defence. Patton's relief was psychologically important and logistically helpful, but not militarily decisive. The battle would continue for another 3 weeks. What Patton's operation proved was that American forces could coordinate multi-corps operations on short notice under adverse conditions. That capability, more than the relief of Bastogne itself, influenced the battle's outcome. The Germans could achieve tactical surprise, but couldn't sustain operations because their logistics failed. The Americans could absorb tactical setbacks and respond with coordinated counteroffensives because their logistics and command structures remained functional. Patton's relief was one example of systemic American advantages that collectively determined the battle. Blood and guts got the headlines. But the real story was organizational competence and material superiority translating into operational success despite German tactical achievements. December 27th, 1944, the German salient in the Ardennes looks on maps like a giant bulge pushing west into Belgium, hence the battle's name. At its widest point, the bulge extends 65 miles deep into Allied territory. At its narrowest, just 16 miles separate German spearheads from the Meuse River. But maps don't show the reality on the ground. German forces exhausted, undersupplied, and increasingly unable to maintain offensive operations. American and British forces, having absorbed the initial shock, are now positioning for counterattack. The strategic situation has reversed. For the first 10 days of the battle, Germany attacked and the Allies defended. Now the Allies will attack and Germany will defend. The question isn't whether Allied forces will eliminate the bulge. They have overwhelming material superiority and the Germans are isolated in extended positions. The question is whether German forces can escape before Allied. Pincers, close and trap them. Hitler, characteristically, forbids withdrawal. German forces in the bulge must hold their positions and counterattack. It's strategically insane, but Hitler's orders are non-negotiable. The stage is set for 3 weeks of brutal winter combat where the outcome is predetermined, but the casualties are very real. The Allied counteroffensive plan is methodologically simple. Attack from north and south, compress the bulge, cut German supply lines, and force withdrawal, or encirclement. Field Marshal Montgomery will attack from the north, with British XXX Corps and US 1st Army elements. General Patton will attack from the south, with 3rd Army. The two forces will meet at Houffalize, a Belgian town roughly in the centre of the bulge. Meeting at Houffalize cuts German forces in two and traps everything west of that line. The plan is coordinated at the highest levels. Eisenhower approves. Montgomery and Patton agree on boundaries and objectives. Air support is allocated. But coordination at high level doesn't guarantee coordination on the ground. British and American forces use different radio frequencies, different map grid systems, different artillery procedures. The potential for friendly fire incidents is significant. Moreover, the Germans aren't passive targets. They're experienced, well-led troops defending terrain they've occupied for 2 weeks. Every American and British advance will be contested. The counteroffensive will succeed, but it won't be easy. January 3, 1945. Montgomery launches the Northern Counteroffensive Operation Veritable with British XXX Corps and elements of US the 7th Corps, attacking south from positions near the northern shoulder of the Bulge. The opening artillery barrage is massive. Thousands of British and American guns firing simultaneously. The ground shaking from the concussion. Then armour and infantry advance through snow 3 feet deep in places, temperatures below 0 Fahrenheit, visibility limited by fog and blowing snow. The Germans defend skillfully, using terrain, prepared positions, and their usual tactical competence. Village defences are anchored on stone buildings that require demolition to reduce. Anti-tank positions are camouflaged in tree lines. German artillery, though outgunned, is positioned for maximum effect. The Allied advance measures progress in hundreds of yards per day, not miles. January 4th, Allied forces capture Hotten after 2 days of fighting. January 5th, they reach Grandmanil, finding the village destroyed and defended by battle groups assembled from remnants of 3 different German divisions. Every gain costs casualties. Every village requires combat. Patton's Third Army attacks from the south on January 3, targeting the towns of Wiltz and Houffalize. The terrain favours defence, forested hills, narrow valleys, roads that become mud tracks in winter thaw. Third Army employs combined arms tactics that have proven effective throughout the European campaign. Artillery preparation, infantry assault, armour exploitation, engineers clearing obstacles. But effectiveness doesn't mean quick. The Germans fight delaying actions, withdrawing slowly from position to position, forcing Americans to clear each one in sequence. January 4, the 30th Infantry Division captures Wiltz after 30 hours of continuous combat. January 5, they advance toward Neuville, scene of desperate fighting in December, now a German strongpoint again. The pattern established in the relief of Bastogne continues steady advance through sustained combat. Casualties on both sides, territory gained measured carefully on maps. Third Army is winning, but winning slowly, grinding through German defences with superior firepower and larger numbers. The weather becomes its own enemy, affecting both attackers and defenders. January 1945 is bitterly cold across Europe, with temperatures dropping to 10 below zero Fahrenheit at night. Snow accumulates to depths that immobilise vehicles. Rivers freeze, then thaw, then freeze again, creating ice flows that make fording impossible. American soldiers develop frostbite at alarming rates. Medical units treat 5,000 cold weather casualties per week, many requiring amputations. Tank engines refuse to start without extensive heating. Infantry attacks through snow exhaust soldiers before they engage the enemy. Logistics becomes nightmarish, supply trucks bogged in mud or sliding on ice, convoys taking twice normal time to reach forward units. The Germans suffer equally, perhaps more, because their logistics are already marginal. But cold affects attackers more than defenders. American troops attacking across open ground in sub-zero temperatures suffer exposure casualties before encountering German fire. German troops defending from prepared positions at least have rudimentary shelter. The weather slows the Allied counteroffensive as effectively as German resistance. January 8, the town of Houffalize emerges as the critical link-up point where northern and southern Allied forces will meet. Houffalize sits on the Authe River in a valley surrounded by forested hills. German forces recognise that losing Houffalize means losing the Bulge. All German units west of Houffalize will be cut off. Hitler, finally, reluctantly, authorises withdrawal from the most advanced positions, allowing German forces to pull back toward more defensible lines. The withdrawal is conducted professionally despite chaos, rearguards fighting, delaying actions, main body withdrawing in stages, equipment destroyed when it cannot be evacuated. The Germans are retreating, but they're not routed. American forces advancing toward Houffalize encounter strong resistance at every defendable position. The Germans aren't trying to hold ground permanently. They're buying time for the withdrawal, trading space for hours that allow more of their forces to escape. Encirclement. January 13. German intelligence realizes that their worst nightmare is materializing. American First Army from the north and Third Army from the south are within 5 miles of each other, closing on Houffalize. Any German units west of this link-up will be trapped. The withdrawal order becomes urgent. Get out now or not at all. German units begin abandoning positions in near panic, moving east as fast as winter roads allow. American forces recognize what's happening and increase pressure, trying to cut off the retreat. January 14th and 15th see some of the most chaotic fighting of the entire battle. German forces trying to retreat through American attacks. American forces trying to cut off Germans while avoiding friendly fire from Allied forces approaching from opposite direction. Artillery from both sides targets the same road junctions. Infantry from 1st and 3rd Armies advance toward each other with insufficient coordination. Several friendly fire incidents occur, including American artillery hitting American positions and infantry units engaging each other before recognizing Allied identification markers. January 16, 1945, patrols from US, 1st Army and 3rd Army meet in Houffalize. The link-up is anticlimactic. Soldiers from the north shake hands with soldiers from the south, confirm they're on the same side, report back that the link-up is complete. The German escape corridor is cut. Any German forces west of Houffalize are now trapped, but most German forces have already withdrawn. Allied commanders hoped to encircle and destroy most of the German army in the Bulge. Reality delivers a more modest success. German forces withdraw in reasonable order, leaving behind destroyed equipment and rear guards, but escaping with most personnel intact. Allied forces capture approximately 23,000 German soldiers, significant, but nowhere near the mass encirclement planners envisioned. The Germans have lost the Bulge but avoided complete destruction. Hitler's refusal to authorize timely withdrawal cost Germany thousands of soldiers and enormous equipment losses. But the late authorization of withdrawal, despite being too late for optimal results, was early enough to prevent total catastrophe. January 17 through 25. Allied forces compressed the Bulge systematically, pushing German forces back toward the original borders. The fighting is attritional and exhausting. Villages change hands multiple times. Supply lines extend as Allied forces advance, while German supply lines shorten, partially compensating for Allied material superiority. Neither side wants this battle. The Allies want the Germans to retreat so they can return to offensive operations toward Germany. The Germans want to retreat to defensible positions and end the losses. But Hitler's orders require continued resistance, and Allied doctrine requires eliminating the salient completely before resuming eastward offensives. So the fighting continues, grinding, exhausting combat through winter conditions that make every action twice as difficult as it should be. January 25, 1945. The Battle of the Bulge officially ends. The front line has been restored to roughly its December 15th position. The Bulge has been eliminated. German forces have withdrawn to their starting positions. The strategic situation is unchanged, except that Germany has lost combat power it cannot replace. The statistics are brutal on both sides. American casualties. Approximately 19,000 killed, 47,000 wounded, 23,000 missing or captured, 89,000 total casualties. British casualties, approximately 200 killed, 1,400 wounded. Estimates vary, but approximately 12,000 to 17,000 killed, 38,000 to 40,000 wounded, 30,000 captured at least. 80,000 total casualties. Both sides have lost hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, enormous quantities of supplies. Both armies are exhausted. But there's an asymmetry that determines strategic impact. America can replace these losses within weeks. Britain can absorb its casualties. Germany cannot. These are the last reserves of the Wehrmacht, the final accumulation of trained soldiers and modern equipment. Spent in the Ardennes, they cannot be regenerated. Germany has delayed Allied offensives by 6 weeks. The cost is accelerating Germany's collapse. The assessment of why it took 41 days to eliminate a salient that was clearly doomed by January 1st reveals several factors. First, terrain and weather. Winter combat in the Ardennes is difficult for attackers regardless of overall strategic advantage. Second, German defensive competence. Wehrmacht forces, even in retreat, fight skillfully using terrain and established defensive doctrine. Third, Allied caution. After being surprised in December, Allied commanders are unwilling to advance recklessly. Fourth, logistics. Moving supplies through winter conditions over damaged infrastructure to advancing units is slow, even for the Allies' superior logistics system. Fifth, casualties. Every advance costs lives, and commanders are increasingly conscious of the human cost of operations. The combination creates a slow, methodical advance where Allied superiority guarantees success but doesn't accelerate the timeline significantly. Military operations occur in friction weather, exhaustion, fear, confusion, the simple difficulty of coordinating thousands of people to accomplish complex tasks under adverse conditions. The friction in January 1945 is extreme. That the Allies succeed despite friction is testament to their material and organisational superiority. That success takes 41 days is testament to how difficult military operations are, even when you're winning. March 1945, 2 months after the Battle of the Bulge ends. Historians haven't yet started debating the battle. The war is still happening. Allied forces are crossing the Rhine River. Berlin is under siege. But already questions are forming in the minds of officers who fought in the Ardennes. Questions that will consume military analysis for decades. What if the weather had stayed bad for 14 days instead of 7? What if Germany had captured Bastogne on December 20th? What if American forces at Schnee-Eifel had withdrawn instead of being surrounded? What if Hitler had pursued General Feldmarschall Model's small solution instead of the Antwerp or nothing strategy? These aren't idle speculation. They're attempts to understand whether Germany ever had a realistic chance of success, whether the Allies got lucky, whether different decisions would have produced different outcomes. The answers reveal something important about the nature of warfare in 1944. Tactics matter, but logistics and material superiority ultimately determine outcomes in modern industrial conflict. Scenario 1. Extended bad weather. Suppose the fog and low clouds that grounded Allied air forces from December 16th through 22nd had persisted until December 30th, 14 days instead of 7. German armour could have advanced without air attack for an additional week. Supply convoys could have moved without being destroyed from above. Would this have changed the outcome? The analysis is complex. Extended bad weather helps German offence but also prevents German resupply by air, which was theoretically planned but never executed. American artillery remains effective regardless of weather, and artillery caused more German casualties than air power. Most critically, the German fuel crisis was caused by systematic American denial of fuel depots, not by air interdiction alone. German forces ran out of fuel by December 21st. Regardless of whether aircraft were flying, extended bad weather might have allowed German forces to advance another 10 to 15 miles before fuel starvation immobilized them. That puts German spearheads at the Meuse River instead of 4 miles from it. But crossing the Meuse requires fuel for continued operations, and that fuel doesn't exist. Extended bad weather prolongs German offensive, but doesn't fundamentally change the outcome. Germany advances farther, suffers fewer casualties initially, but still fails to achieve strategic objectives due to logistics collapse. Scenario 2. Bastogne falls on December 20th. Suppose German forces had overrun Bastogne before the 101st Airborne arrived, or suppose the encircled Airborne had surrendered when offered terms. What changes? Bastogne's road network becomes available for German logistics, supply convoys can reach forward units more efficiently, German armour divisions can move north toward their objectives, instead of being diverted to reduce Bastogne. The analysis suggests this is perhaps the most dangerous German success scenario. With Bastogne in German hands by December 20th, fuel supplies might reach forward units before complete immobilization. German spearheads might cross the Meuse by December 23rd or 24th. But crossing the Meuse doesn't win the offensive, it just advances German forces into territory where they're even more extended and vulnerable. Allied forces are still concentrating, the weather is still clearing, American reserves are still unlimited. At best, capturing Bastogne allows Germany to advance to the Meuse and perhaps establish bridgeheads. Then what? The drive to Antwerp requires another 70 miles through increasingly heavy Allied resistance. German logistics cannot support operations that extended. Capturing Bastogne accelerates German advance and creates a more dangerous crisis, but doesn't provide strategic success. Germany reaches the Meuse, then stalls, for the same reasons: fuel, supplies, Allied counter-concentration. Scenario 3. Schnee-Eifel withdrawal. Suppose the 2 regiments of the 106th Division on the Schnee-Eifel had received authorization to withdraw on December 17th instead of being ordered to hold position and eventually surrendering on December 19th. 6,000 additional American troops escape to fight another day. Does this change the battle? The immediate impact is that German forces in the centre sector face slightly more organised resistance, maybe an additional day of delay capturing Street Vith, maybe better defensive positions, but the strategic impact is minimal. Germany's offensive wasn't stopped by specific tactical defeats. It was stopped by cumulative delays and logistics failures across the entire front. Saving the Schnee-Eifel regiments improves American force availability but doesn't change German planning failures. Schnee-Eifel. Withdrawal is better for the Americans who avoid captivity, marginally better for American defensive strength, but doesn't significantly alter the battle's course. Germany still advances roughly the same distance, still runs out of fuel at roughly the same time, still fails to reach Antwerp. Scenario 4. Model's small solution. This is perhaps the most interesting counterfactual because it represents the alternative plan German generals actually proposed. Instead of driving for Antwerp, General de Panzertruppe, Hasso von Manteuffel, and General Feldmarschall Walter Model suggested a limited offensive. Break through the Ardennes, advance 30 to 40 miles, encircle 4 or 5 American divisions, destroy them, then establish defensive positions on more favourable terrain. The objective is tactical victory and forcing Allied pause in their offensives, not strategic breakthrough to Antwerp. The analysis suggests this plan was actually achievable. Germany had sufficient fuel for a 30-mile advance. Encircling several divisions was feasible. In fact, Germany nearly accomplished this at Schnee-Eifel despite pursuing the larger Antwerp objective. The small solution requires fewer resources, has more realistic objectives, and plays to German strengths in mobile defense. If executed, it might have destroyed 20,000 to 30,000 American soldiers, forced a 2-month Allied pause while lines were restored, and prolonged the war into summer 1945. The small solution was Germany's best realistic option. It wouldn't have changed the war's outcome. Germany was still losing, still facing overwhelming Allied superiority. But it might have traded space for time, inflicted significant American casualties, and demonstrated continued German capability to conduct offensive operations, potentially affecting Allied war termination negotiations. The fundamental question underlying all counterfactuals: was Antwerp ever achievable? The answer requires examining the full operational requirements. Distance from German jumping-off positions to Antwerp, 125 miles. German fuel stocks, sufficient for approximately 60 miles of operations. Fuel capture requirements, 4 million gallons minimum, from depots that Americans systematically destroyed. Timeline. Hitler's plan allowed 7 days to reach Antwerp. Actual German advance achieved 60 miles in 10 days before stalling. Allied response time. Major reinforcements arrived within 72 hours, full counter-concentration within 1 week. Allied air power, 5,000 aircraft available once weather cleared. German air power, fewer than 800 operational aircraft total. The mathematics are overwhelming. Even if everything had gone perfectly for Germany, weather bad for 14 days, Bastogne captured immediately. All American defensive failures. Maximum fuel capture, the advance toward Antwerp, would have stalled somewhere around the Meuse River, due to fuel exhaustion and Allied counter-concentration. Antwerp was never realistically achievable. Hitler's plan required miracles. American collapse that didn't happen, fuel capture that couldn't happen, Allied paralysis that wasn't possible given their institutional advantages. The plan was strategically bankrupt from inception, succeeding tactically for 1 week before inevitable failure. Post-war German generals universally condemned the Antwerp plan. Von Rundstedt, overall commander in the West, the operation was called Watch on the Rhine, but it should have been called Stupidity on the Rhine. Model, Army Group B commander, shortly before his suicide in April 1945. We gambled everything and lost everything. Manteuffel, 5th Panzer Army commander. We did our best with insufficient means to achieve impossible objectives. Even Joachim Peiper, whose Kampfgruppe achieved the deepest penetration, later states, "We knew by December 20th that the fine no offensive had failed. Everything after that was just dying slowly." The consensus among German commanders is that the offensive was brilliantly executed at tactical level but strategically delusional. They achieved surprise, created a massive salient advanced farther than Allied commanders thought possible, and accomplished nothing except accelerating their own defeat by consuming irreplaceable resources in an operation that couldn't succeed. The Allied perspective reveals different what-ifs. What if intelligence had detected the German build-up? What if Vith had fallen on December 17th as Germans planned? What if the Meuse bridges had been captured? The answer suggests Allied victory was never seriously threatened, though the path to victory might have varied. Better intelligence would have prevented tactical surprise, but wouldn't have fundamentally altered German logistics problems. Vith falling earlier would have accelerated German advance, but not solved fuel shortages. Capturing Meuse bridges would have created a crisis, but not strategic breakthrough, because Allied reserves could concentrate faster than Germany could exploit success. The Battle of the Bulge was dangerous for the Allies. It cost American lives, destroyed equipment, delayed eastward offensives. But it was never an existential threat. Germany lacked the material resources to achieve strategic success regardless of tactical performance. The ultimate counterfactual: what if the Battle of the Bulge had never happened? What if Germany had conserved the 400,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and immense supplies consumed in the Ardennes, and instead used them to defend the Rhine River and delay Allied advance into Germany? The historical consensus is that this would have prolonged the war by several months. The forces destroyed in the Ardennes could have contested Rhine crossings in March 1945, forcing costly Allied assaults. German defences could have been deeper, more organised, more effective. The final collapse might have occurred in summer 1945 instead of spring. More soldiers would have died American, British, German, Soviet. More civilians would have suffered. The Holocaust would have continued longer. The Battle of the Bulge, paradoxically, shortened the war by destroying German reserves that might have prolonged resistance. Hitler's gamble failed operationally but succeeded strategically for the Allies. It convinced Hitler that bold offensive action could still change outcomes, leading him to commit resources offensively that would have been more effective defensively. The Bulge was Germany's last major offensive of the war. After January 1945, Wehrmacht forces were capable only of defence, and increasingly ineffective defence as material losses accumulated. The offensive Germany, launched to change the war's direction, instead accelerated the outcome they feared. Sometimes, the worst military defeats are the ones that look like victories, at first. January 1945, the forests of the Ardennes. Graves registration teams moved through the battlefield with maps, stretchers, and body bags, searching for the dead. Winter has preserved bodies in grotesque tableau soldiers, frozen in positions of combat or flight, sometimes covered by snow, sometimes exposed by wind. A German machine gunner still grips his weapon, frozen to the metal. An American medic lies beside a wounded soldier he died trying to save, both men preserved in ice. The recovery operation is grim necessity. Bodies cannot be left where they fell. Disease, morale, simple human dignity require proper burial, but the scale is overwhelming. The Battle of the Bulge has killed 19,000 Americans, more than 12,000 Germans, unknown numbers of Belgian civilians. Many bodies won't be found until spring. Thor reveals soldiers who died alone in the forests, who crawled into foxholes with mortal wounds and were buried by snow. The cost of 6 weeks of winter combat is measured in bodies, in frozen limbs that require amputation, in minds broken by sustained exposure to horror. This is the price of the Battle of the Bulge, not the strategic outcome or territorial gains, but the human cost paid in suffering and death. The casualty statistics are comprehensive but inadequate. Numbers cannot convey experience. American casualties, 19,000 killed, 47,000 wounded, 23,000 missing or captured. The killed include soldiers burned alive in destroyed tanks, soldiers who bled to death in foxholes waiting for medics who never came, soldiers shot by snipers, killed by artillery, victims of accidents in the chaos of combat. The wounded include men who will recover and men who will carry injuries for life. Lost limbs, blindness, paralysis, traumatic brain injuries that change personality and capability. The missing include soldiers captured, soldiers whose bodies were never recovered, soldiers who wandered from units in confusion and died in forests. Every number represents a person, someone's son, husband, brother, father. Every casualty leaves absence that families and units will carry forward. The statistics describe magnitude but not meaning. German casualties mirror American losses: 12,000 to 17,000 killed, 38,000 to 40,000 wounded, 30,000 captured. But German losses have different strategic weight. America can replace these casualties within months. Training pipelines produce new soldiers, industrial capacity produces equipment, logistics deliver everything to Europe. Germany cannot replace losses. These are Wehrmacht veterans, experienced soldiers from Eastern and Western Front campaigns, trained officers, skilled technicians. Killed or captured in the Ardennes, they're irreplaceable. German divisions that began the offensive at 70 to 80% strength and at 30 to 40%. Some elite units ceased to exist as combat formations. The 1st SS Panzer Division, which began with 5,000 men, ends with fewer than 1,500 combat-effective troops. The losses aren't just numerical, they're qualitative. Germany has spent its military seed corn in a failed offensive, ensuring that subsequent defensive operations will be conducted by increasingly inadequate forces. The frostbite epidemic reveals another dimension of the battle's human cost. Medical units treat more than 15,000 American soldiers for cold weather injuries during the Battle of the Bulge. Frostbite occurs when flesh freezes feet, hands, faces exposed to sub-zero temperatures. Mild frostbite causes pain and blisters. Severe frostbite kills tissue, requiring amputation. Soldiers fight in temperatures that drop below 0 Fahrenheit at night, sometimes for days without relief, wearing uniforms designed for temperate climates. Their feet freeze in boots that aren't insulated. Their hands freeze on metal weapons. By the time they're evacuated to medical facilities, the damage is done. Field hospitals perform hundreds of amputations, toes, fingers, feet, hands, soldiers who survive combat but lose parts of themselves to cold. The German forces suffer similarly. Cold doesn't discriminate by nationality. The winter of 1944 to 1945 is exceptionally severe across Europe, and soldiers on both sides pay the price in frozen flesh. The psychological casualties are harder to quantify but equally real. The U.S. Army in 1944 calls it battle fatigue or combat exhaustion, soldiers who break psychologically under sustained stress. Modern terminology would call it post-traumatic stress disorder, combat stress reaction, acute stress disorder. Whatever the name, the symptoms are consistent. Inability to function, uncontrollable shaking, crying, catatonia, dissociation from reality. Some soldiers recover after rest. Others never fully recover, carrying psychological scars for decades. The Battle of the Bulge produces battle fatigue casualties at rates exceeding previous campaigns. Units in sustained combat without relief for 10 to 15 days show psychiatric casualty rates of 10 to 20%. The combination of factors, surprise attack, winter conditions, German atrocities like Malmedy, sustained artillery fire, sleep deprivation, inadequate food creates psychological pressure that exceeds many soldiers' capacity to cope. Medical evacuation records show thousands of soldiers evacuated for psychiatric reasons, some of whom return to duty, many of whom don't. The Malmedy massacre's aftermath poisons the battle's moral dimension. 84 Americans executed by SS troops on December 17th. The news spreads through American units within hours, carried by survivors, amplified by rage. The effect on American combat behaviour is immediate and lasting. German soldiers, attempting to surrender, are sometimes shot. Wounded Germans are sometimes executed. The attitude becomes visceral. SS troops marked for death, no mercy, no exceptions. This shift represents moral corruption born of justified outrage. Malmedy was a war crime, but responding to war crimes with additional war crimes creates a cycle of atrocity. Not all American units behave this way. Many commanders enforce discipline and proper treatment of prisoners. But enough incidents occur that German soldiers, especially SS, understand that surrender carries significant risk. The Battle of the Bulge sees higher rates of fight-to-the-death last stands by German units than previous Western Front battles, partially because German troops fear they won't survive surrender. The mutual brutality escalates, creating a feedback loop where both sides behave worse because they expect the other side to behave badly. Belgian civilian casualties are often forgotten in English-language histories that focus on military operations, but Belgian citizens bore significant costs from the battle. Approximately 3,000 Belgian civilians were killed, caught in crossfire, killed by artillery, executed by German forces in reprisal operations, victims of aerial bombing, dying from exposure after fleeing their homes. Hundreds of Belgian villages were damaged or destroyed. The town of Houffalize was 90% destroyed. Bastogne required major rebuilding. Smaller villages ceased to exist. Populations scattered. Buildings reduced to rubble. The civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, churches, was destroyed across the combat zone. Belgian citizens who survived faced famine conditions in winter, 1944 to 1945. Food supplies were disrupted. Livestock was killed or requisitioned by military forces. The cold that affected soldiers killed civilians who lacked shelter. Belgium had already suffered 4 years of German occupation, exploitation, and repression. The Battle of the Bulge added additional suffering, liberation postponed, infrastructure destroyed, civilians killed by armies of liberation or occupation depending on which side prevailed locally. The recovery of bodies continues through spring 1945. As snow melts, graves registration teams find soldiers who died in December and weren't discovered until March or April. Sometimes they're identified by dog tags, sometimes by personal effects, sometimes they're too decomposed for identification and are buried as unknown. The American military maintains records attempting to account for every soldier. Families receive telegrams, killed in action, missing in action, remains recovered. But many families receive nothing definitive, son missing, presumed dead, remains never found. The same happens in Germany, though German record-keeping has collapsed by 1945. Families wait for soldiers who will never return, uncertain whether they're dead, captured, missing. The uncertainty is its own torture, hope, and grief, coexisting in limbo that sometimes lasts decades. The long-term impact on veterans shapes the remainder of their lives. Soldiers who fought in the Bulge carry memories they often can't articulate: the sight of frozen corpses, the sound of artillery, the smell of burning vehicles, the constant cold, the fear. Some adapt, processing the trauma and building functional lives. Others struggle with nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, depression, relationship difficulties, substance abuse, the full catalogue of post-traumatic responses. Support systems in 1945 are minimal. The Veterans Administration exists, but is overwhelmed. Psychological care is rudimentary by modern standards. Many veterans never receive treatment for trauma, suffering in silence through decades of civilian life. The cost of the Battle of the Bulge for these men isn't measured in December 1944. It's measured across lifetimes, marriages strained by unprocessed trauma, careers limited by psychological injury, suicide rates elevated among combat veterans. The battle ends in January 1945. The price continues being paid for 50 years. The ultimate accounting asks whether the cost was justified. 19,000 Americans dead, 89,000 total American casualties, similar German losses, thousands of Belgian civilians killed, infrastructure destroyed, psychological trauma affecting tens of thousands. What was achieved? Strategic answer: the German offensive was defeated, Allied advance toward Germany delayed by 6 weeks, German reserves destroyed. But was defeating the offensive worth this cost, or would the strategic outcome have been similar without the battle occurring? The counterfactual suggests the battle shortened the war by destroying German reserves that might have prolonged fighting. If true, the lives lost in December 1944 potentially saved lives that would have been lost in March through June 1945. But that calculation is cold comfort to the families who lost sons, to the soldiers who lost limbs, to the veterans who lost peace of mind. War is horror, rationalised by necessity. The Battle of the Bulge was necessary, German forces attacked, Allied forces responded, the battle had to be fought. But necessity doesn't erase cost. It only provides context for grief. The bodies in the snow, frozen in January 1945, thawed in spring and were buried with military honours. Their sacrifice is honoured, but honour doesn't restore life or erase suffering. It only acknowledges that some prices, once paid, can never be refunded. May 8th, 1945, Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. 5 months have passed since the Battle of the Bulge ended. 5 months of continued combat as Allied forces crossed the Rhine, drove into Germany, and methodically destroyed Wehrmacht resistance. The Red Army captured Berlin. American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe River. Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. The Third Reich ceased to exist. And now, in the immediate aftermath of victory, Allied commanders begin assessing what the Ardennes offensive meant. General Dwight Eisenhower's staff calculates that the Battle of the Bulge delayed Allied offensives by approximately 6 weeks. Without the German attack, Allied forces might have crossed the Rhine in February instead of March, might have reached Berlin in April instead of May, but they also calculate that the battle destroyed German strategic reserves, the forces that might have contested Rhine crossings, that might have prolonged the war into summer or beyond. The paradox is clear. Germany's offensive delayed Allied victory in the short term, but accelerated German defeat in the longer term. Hitler's last gamble failed operationally and succeeded strategically for the wrong side. The strategic impact on the Rhine crossings is direct and measurable. When Allied forces approached the Rhine River in March 1945, they faced resistance that was substantial but not overwhelming. German units defending the Rhine included second-line troops, hastily organised Volkssturm militia, remnants of divisions destroyed in earlier fighting. The elite formations that might have made Rhine crossings costly, the panzer divisions, the experienced infantry, the SS units had been destroyed in the Ardennes or were deployed against the Soviets in the east. The Remagen Bridge was captured on March 7th by American forces who faced minimal resistance. Within weeks, Allied armies were across the Rhine at multiple points, advancing into Germany with opposition that was fierce locally but couldn't cohere into effective defence. Post-war analysis consistently concludes that if the 28 divisions Germany committed to the Ardennes had instead defended the Rhine, Allied casualties in Rhine crossings would have been significantly higher, and the timeline to German defeat would have been longer. Hitler's decision to attack rather than defend traded immediate tactical success for strategic acceleration of his own defeat. The impact on Allied coalition unity is the opposite of what Hitler predicted. Hitler's theory was that a sharp, devastating blow would crack the Anglo-American alliance, that Churchill and Roosevelt would blame each other for the disaster, that tensions between Montgomery and American generals would explode into command crisis. Instead, the opposite occurred. The German attack unified Allied command. Political tensions between British and American leaders were subordinated to immediate military necessity. Montgomery's temporary command of American forces north of the Bulge, which might have created controversy, was accepted pragmatically. Churchill publicly praised American soldiers' performance. Roosevelt emphasized continued Allied cooperation. Stalin, informed of the crisis, accelerated Soviet offensives in the east to relieve pressure on Western allies. The German attack that was supposed to split the Allies instead demonstrated their ability to coordinate responses and maintain alliance cohesion under crisis. Post-war memoirs from Allied leaders consistently describe the Bulge as a moment that strengthened rather than weakened coalition bonds. German generals' post-war assessments are uniformly critical of Hitler's plan. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, interviewed by American interrogators, "It was a stupid operation. The conditions for success were never present. We achieved surprise, but nothing else of value." General Feldmarschall Walter Model, before his suicide, "We gambled everything and lost everything. The reserves expended in the Ardennes could have prolonged the war by months if used defensively." General de Panzertrupphasse von Manteuffel, "We were ordered to accomplish the impossible with insufficient means. That we advanced as far as we did is testament to German soldiers' quality, not to the plan's viability. The consensus among German military professionals is that the offensive was operationally brilliant, achieving surprise, breaking through Allied lines, advancing 60 miles, but strategically bankrupt. The objectives were unachievable. The logistics were inadequate. The assumptions about American collapse were fantasy. Germany's military performed superbly in executing a plan that couldn't succeed, demonstrating professionalism in service of delusion." The long-term military lessons from the Battle of the Bulge shaped doctrine for decades. First lesson: material superiority is decisive in modern warfare. Germany achieved tactical excellence and still lost because Allied forces had more fuel, more ammunition, more replacements, better logistics. Second lesson: air power is strategically critical but weather-dependent. The week of fog that grounded Allied aircraft allowed German success. The weather. Clearing ensured German defeat. Third lesson: logistics determines operational capability more than tactical skill. German advances stalled not because of combat defeats, but because of fuel exhaustion. Fourth lesson: intelligence can fail catastrophically even against an enemy whose communications you can read. The German build-up was detectable, but wasn't detected because analysis failed. Fifth lesson: defensive operations by competent forces can delay but not stop attackers with overwhelming material advantage. Germany delayed Allied victory by 6 weeks. Delay isn't defeat. These lessons inform American and NATO military doctrine through the Cold War and beyond, shaping training, procurement, and operational planning. The Battle of the Bulge's place in American memory becomes mythologized in ways that distort historical reality. Bastogne and the nuts, Reply become iconic symbols of American defiance, appearing in films, books, monuments. Patton's relief of Bastogne is portrayed as cavalry to the rescue heroism. The narrative emphasizes American resilience and German defeat. What gets lost is the genuine shock of the offensive, the initial American failures, the thousands of soldiers who surrendered at Schnee-Eifel, the panic in rear areas, the friendly fire incidents, the war crimes on both sides, the sheer confusion and terror of combat in winter. The sanitized memory emphasizes heroism and victory. The messy reality involved chaos, mistakes, atrocities, and victory achieved through material superiority rather than moral clarity. Both narratives are true. The soldiers who held Bastogne were genuinely heroic. The overall battle was genuinely chaotic and brutal. Memory tends to polish history into lessons, but the lessons only work if the polish doesn't obscure the underlying complexity. The German memory of the battle is complicated by the Third Reich's collapse and subsequent division of Germany. In West Germany, the Battle of the Bulge becomes an example of Wehrmacht professionalism. Despite Nazi leadership's failings, German soldiers fought skillfully for a regime that was morally reprehensible. The narrative separates soldierly virtue from regime criminality, a separation that's historically questionable given Wehrmacht involvement in Nazi war crimes. In East Germany, the battle barely registers in official histories that emphasize Soviet contributions to defeating fascism. Individual German veterans carry their own memories, pride in military performance mixed with awareness that they fought for an evil cause, survivors' guilt about friends who died, complex feelings about heroism in service of genocide. The German memory is necessarily fragmented by national division, individual trauma, and moral complexity that American memory can avoid because America fought for a cause that was genuinely just. The Belgian memory emphasizes civilian suffering and the cost of liberation. Belgian national narrative positions the Battle of the Bulge as the final German offense before liberation, the last trauma before freedom. Monuments throughout the Ardennes commemorate specific battles, units, and individuals. Belgian civilians who lived through the battle carry memories of fighting in their streets, homes destroyed, family members killed. The American soldiers who liberated Belgium once are remembered as liberators, but also as the people whose battles destroyed Belgian property and killed Belgian civilians. The relationship between liberators and liberated is complex gratitude mixed with resentment, appreciation mixed with awareness that liberation came at Belgian cost. Belgian guides at Battle of the Bulge historical sites tell stories that emphasize civilian experience alongside military operations, insisting that memory include the people whose homes became battlefields. The ultimate assessment of the Battle of the Bulge asks whether it mattered. Tactically, yes, it killed thousands, destroyed equipment, and forced 6 weeks of desperate combat. Strategically, paradoxically, it mattered by accelerating the outcome both sides sought to avoid or achieve. Germany sought to prolong the war and force favourable peace. Instead, the offensive consumed resources that might have prolonged the war, shortened it instead. The Allies sought to defeat Germany efficiently. The German attack delayed efficiency but consumed German strength, ultimately making the final Allied advance easier. Psychologically, the battle mattered enormously. American soldiers learned they could absorb surprise attacks and win through resilience and material advantage. German soldiers learned that tactical excellence couldn't overcome strategic bankruptcy. The lesson that both sides learned is that modern industrial warfare is determined more by logistics, production, and resources than by soldier quality or tactical skill. Courage matters, skill matters. But fuel, ammunition, and replacement capacity matter more. The final verdict, 75 years after the battle, is that the Battle of the Bulge was Germany's last demonstration of offensive capability and first clear proof that capability couldn't change outcomes. The Wehrmacht could still attack, surprise, advance, and fight skillfully, but they couldn't sustain operations, couldn't overcome material disadvantage, couldn't achieve strategic objectives regardless of tactical performance. The battle proved that the war's outcome had been determined months earlier, probably by summer 1944 when Allied logistics stabilised after Normandy breakout. Everything after that point was playing out an inevitable conclusion at varying speeds. Germany could delay, they couldn't win. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's attempt to disprove this reality through will and audacity. The attempt failed comprehensively, proving instead that reality doesn't bend to will when arithmetic and logistics say otherwise. The bodies in the snow, the burned tanks, the destroyed villages. These are the price paid to prove what cooler analysis could have concluded without combat. Germany had lost, was losing, and would lose regardless of how skillfully they fought. Sometimes battles matter for what they prove. The Battle of the Bulge proved that by December 1944, tactical excellence was insufficient, surprise was temporary, and offensive action by a materially bankrupt power was strategic suicide wrapped in operational competence. Hitler gambled on a miracle. He got arithmetic instead. The last gamble failed, because gambles, when made from desperation against overwhelming odds, almost always fail. The legacy is the lesson. Courage and skill are essential, but insufficient. Modern war is won by logistics, production, and the patient application of overwhelming force. The Third Reich forgot this truth. The Ardennes in winter 1944-45 reminded them with finality written in frozen corpses and abandoned tanks. The lesson endures. The price was terrible. The truth remains.